How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
It sounds better for the listeners when we record the episode instead of us just talking amongst ourselves.
I think you're giving us a lot of credit.
Gary,
just get on there and be like, hey, we recorded an episode. We want you guys to think about it. There you go.
Gary, how many of the reviews did you find that reference flies eating poop?
Just one, actually.
Only one.
And I have it.
Surprising.
Yeah, interesting.
Disappointing.
Yeah. Most of them, a lot of the lower reviews, like user reviews, are about Jeff Goldblum. They're from women saying, like, literally one says, this movie stopped being interesting when Goldblum stopped being hot. And a lot of reviews seem to reference that just women find Jeff Goldblum attractive and they're disappointed that a lot of men not attractive by the end, unless you're into that.
What flies? Giant flies?
Giant flies.
What a weird fetish.
And to be honest, I'm not saying I don't think that I would have watched this movie, and if I didn't know it was called The Fly and the plot of the movie, I don't know that you look at him and think, oh, it's a fucking fly. I don't think you get that right off the bat.
He doesn't have wings. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We haven't even started the episode yet.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Sorry, guys. If you haven't seen The Fly yet, he turns into a fucking fly.
Why are you listening to this? I mean, technically, he's a fly-human hybrid, so you can forgive it for not looking exactly like a fly.
I did a lot of research for this, including going back and listening to our old episode on The Fly. Yeah.
Still out there, huh?
There's some classics stuff on there. Like I made a joke about Mel Brooks and how there was no line about he needed to zip up his Brundlefly at any point. I just thought that would be a Mel Brooks contribution to the movie. I laughed at myself. I don't get to do that very often, and that was fun. Anyway, well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I am one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
Hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm Mr. Todd A. Davis, curator of the Davis Museum of Natural History, which includes the longest, whitest nose hair you've ever seen, a collection of navel lint arranged by color, and a giant jar of jizz. Welcome to our final installment in our series titled The New Flesh, the Body Horror of David Cronenberg.
Does the Davis Cabinet of Curiosities include your dick that's fallen off? Because his dick is definitely in that cabinet in this movie.
I was going to say that same thing, or at least the Jeff Goldblum prosthetic. Could you? That's got to be somewhere. Somebody's got to have.
Somebody owns that.
Somebody's got it.
David Cronenberg probably owns it. Honestly,
I imagine like he put it in a jar full of like really clear, or as clear as he could, like apple juice, so it just looks all preserved and shit. Oh, and to answer your question, no, my dick has not been retired yet, so until my dick actually falls off, it will not be added to the Davis Museum.
No, really glad we're starting around the Davis dick. That's how you know you're old, when you start getting like the white pubes. That's when it really kicks in. I don't think I've got those yet, so I feel good about that.
Even with all that gray in your beard,
I know I've got a ton of gray in my beard,
but no white pubes yet.
No white pubes yet.
Wow,
I've seen.
Wow, we're learning more about Gary today than I had bargained for. Todd, did you say that this was our final episode?
Our final installment in the series.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. I didn't mean final episode ever. I hope.
Yeah,
I meant final episode of The New Flesh.
Yeah,
not getting rid of us that easy.
Yes, this is the conclusion to our David Cronenberg series for now. Yes. He's got a lot more movies after this, but as far as the body horror of David Cronenberg, this is the end of the line. So after the success of Scanners and The Dead Zone and the critical respect for Videodrome, despite it not doing that well at the box office, David Cronenberg's name had held some weight in Hollywood. He was considered a filmmaker who was very professional. People liked working with him, and for whom producers and studios could safely invest their money, and more than likely they're going to get a pretty nice profit back. But more than that, he'd started to become a brand, with themes and eccentricities that were seen as kind of his calling card. Especially in horror movie circles. This is a guy that was talked about a lot in horror movie fanzines like Fangoria and Cinefantastique, things like that. He was a major kind of cultural figure among horror fans in the early 1980s. In 1983, David Cronenberg completed a script for a new movie for Universal that he had done Videodrome with them. Even though it didn't do well at the box office, they still wanted to continue that relationship. So they asked him to write another script. It was a script called Six Legs, which never developed any further, though parts of the script would resurface in Naked Lunch a few years later. Six Legs was, oddly enough, an ensemble comedy that Cronenberg later compared to Ghostbusters.
Interesting.
He described it as being, this is a quote from Cronenberg about entomologists discovering an insect on a Caribbean island that is addictive when you eat it. The adventures of the main guy and his two strange friends. So the Ghostbusters angle is that it was about these three kind of eccentric guys running around in a van with a symbol on it, only instead of a ghost, it's like a big bug. So, but of course, this was a year or so before Ghostbusters. Universal ended up passing on the project. I guess I don't know if they just didn't like the script or what, or maybe they just didn't think Cronenberg was funny. I can't see. He's pretty funny in interviews. Like he's got this very dry humor.
Yeah, I was gonna say
that I really like.
He's got a real deadpan sense to him. Yeah,
but you don't see a lot of that come through in his movies, in any of his movies, really. So I struggle to imagine a comedy directed by David Cronenberg. I can imagine almost any other genre, but a comedy is kind of hard. So I don't know why Universal passed on it, but that's my best guess. But as we know, Cronenberg's fascination with insects would resurface. I think if I recall right, Gary, you might remind me on our first episode, wasn't he like he was like a junior entomologist or something when he was a kid? Didn't we talk about that back on our first episode? So he's been into bugs like forever.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that a little bit more because he does mention that was some of his issues with the original Fly, the original film. How
unrealistic it is.
Yeah.
Well, it was
there's no truth in that art, Justin.
It was also during the same period of his career that he started receiving a bunch of offers from Hollywood. We mentioned some on our last episode. He was offered films like Beverly Hills Cop, Witness, Top Gun, Flashdance. We mentioned all those, I think, last time. But the one that he came closest to actually making was an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's story called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which, of course, was renamed Total Recall. Of course, we detailed that film's journey to the screen, including a lot of David Cronenberg's involvement and his contributions to that film when we dedicated a full episode to it on our Paul Verhoeven series a few months ago. So if you really want all the dirty details on that, go listen to that Total Recall episode, because it's pretty cool how much of, even though the film is very different from what Cronenberg was planning, there are some major elements of that film that didn't exist before he came along.
If anybody's looking for a connection to like our last episode, I mean, he was doing it because of his relationship with Dino De Laurentiis, who was, doing this movie at the time until his company went bankrupt. But that's how Cronenberg was actually attached to it in the first place.
And Cronenberg spent a lot of time working on Total Recall. According to him, he wrote something like 13 drafts of the script before he kind of realized that he and the film's producers, which included, Dan O'Bannon and Ronald, what's his name?
Shusett. Yeah.
Shusett. He kind of realized that they were kind of trying to make a very different film. He was not making the film that they had planned. They were wanting to make a film that he had no interest in. Ronald Shusett, I think, wanted to make it like Indiana Jones in space on Mars, which is not a David Cronenberg movie.
No, not so much.
So once they realized this, they decided to part ways, but he had done a lot of work on it. So he was kind of burnt out after that. So and he was also out of work after that. So when the next offer came along, he quickly accepted it. And the film that resulted would end up being his most successful and probably the film that's most associated with Cronenberg's style of body horror more than any other film in his filmography. That film is, of course, the subject of today's episode, The Fly.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
I want to know what's going on.
What does the disease want?
Wants to turn me into something else.
Oh, no.
A fly got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone.
Don't go back to it.
It could be contagious.
I'm afraid!
Don't be afraid.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Help me. Please, help me.
Looking forward to this one for a while, man.
Yeah?
This is a blast from the past, dude.
So is this the one you've been most familiar with of this series?
Yeah, this was one that was in heavy rotation like Sunday afternoon on Fox when they would just kind of play, outside of like football season. They would just play a bunch of movies back to back Sunday afternoons on, the local syndicated, probably Fox or NBC or ABC, one of those stations. And yeah, this was in regular rotation because it's, besides the body horror, it's actually somewhat clean. Like it's not like a super, it's not vulgar. I should say
it's not vulgar. There's one sex scene. Well, I guess maybe two. Yeah. But you don't see anything.
Yeah, you don't really see anything. And I mean, considering some of the things we've talked about on this show, it's pretty tame by comparison.
Yeah. So before we continue on this, I do want to give another source that I used pretty heavily on this episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's Fangoria magazine. Again, Fangoria number 58 had a cover story with The Fly where they had an in-depth interview with Chris Wallace. Tony Timpone, who is a longtime writer for Fangoria, still writes for Fangoria. He interviewed Chris Wallace. And in fact, the two issues of Fangoria before this, issues number 56 and 57, there was a two-part interview with David Cronenberg that Tony Timpone did. So between those three issues, I got a good bit of information. The Cronenberg one interview was very interesting. There weren't a lot of like facts about the filming or the development, but it was a lot of like really cool information about his approach to the material, if that makes sense. So development on The Fly had begun in the early 1980s when a producer named Kip Oman approached a screenwriter by the name of Charles Edward Pogue with the idea of remaking the 1958 film of the same name. That movie had been directed by Kurt Newman and starred Vincent Price and Patricia Owens. It's a classic. That film, which itself, it was a very big success upon release. It spawned two sequels, The Return of the Fly and The Curse of the Fly. And the original film, though not the sequels, was based on a short story by George Langland.
I actually got to watch both of those sequels, or all three of those movies. I bought the box set.
And, the Shout Factory. I've got that.
Yeah,
but I've not watched the sequels yet to the original. How were they?
I'm actually a big fan. I think the second one is the most lacking. The third one just goes like wild with the concept. And I was actually pretty impressed with, I guess I could say it now because it doesn't really, I mean, there's no reference that David Cronenberg necessarily watched it or anything, but The Curse of the Fly definitely gets into body horror. Like it, I mean, they touch on it in part 2. There's a scene where he tries to transport a guinea pig, or he does like a guinea pig with a guy, and the guy ends up having, or the guinea pig has human hands, and that's kind of weird. But in the third one's pretty dark, man. It's completely disconnected. It acts like I don't know. It's like it tries to connect, but nothing kind of makes sense storyline wise. It's like the grandkid of Vincent Price's character, or his brother in the original movie. Anyway, point is, there's definitely some stuff where like people get teleported and then they come out as like mushy variations of things.
Fun.
Yeah.
The first movie is really good. I mean, it's a little hokey by today's standards, but it's pretty good. It's very gorgeously shot. I think they shot it in CinemaScope and full widescreen, which I think the sequels are both black and white. Is that right, Gary?
Yeah.
A little bit lower budget, but
right. And I'll tell you, the first one still to this day. I don't know if it's just my thing with spiders or whatever, but the scene at the end where he's like, where they're actually looking at him in the web and he's just like screaming for help as the spider just like crawls towards him, even as campy as it looks. I'm like, man, that's fucked up. Like, and they just kind of watch it happen.
I think it's probably that probably has a little bit to do with your fear of spiders, Gary, because I think that seems goofy as hell, but it's still iconic, but
I just think that would be so terrible. You're just like laying there like trapped in the spider web, and the spider.
Yeah, I mean, it would suck.
Yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, the second one plays with that again, where they do the head swap thing, but we'll talk about that more.
So George Langland, who wrote the original short story, we could go on a whole little side quest, do a whole like bonus episode on this guy because he's very interesting. But here's kind of the Cliff's Notes version of this guy's story. He was born in Paris, France, to French and British parents, and he worked as a spy for the Allied powers in World War II. He even underwent plastic surgery to alter his appearance before being dropped into enemy territory because they thought he was too recognizable, like his ears stuck out a little bit. And so he had to have his appearance altered to make him look kind of more neutral, more boring before he got dropped behind enemy lines.
Wow.
So he's on a mission. He parachutes into France and he is captured by the Nazis. The Nazis condemn him to death. They're holding him in a concentration camp, and he escapes. So this is a movie right here.
Yeah.
This whole thing is a movie. He returned to England, but he wasn't done with the war. He actually ended up participating in the Normandy landings on D-Day, like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. He was there. And he ended up getting all kinds of war medals from France and England. Like this guy has an insane life. And if that's not enough, when he was back in England, he formed a friendship with Aleister Crowley for a while.
What?
I want to write this one, Aleister and me.
Yeah. Aleister and me. I want to see a whole movie about George Langland and Aleister Crowley just hanging out like a little buddy comedy. I want to watch that.
Oh man, that would be so much fun.
Crazy. And it wasn't until after the war that he actually began his writing career. He wrote his memoirs, novels, short stories, several of which were turned into movies or episodes of television, like on Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Twilight Zone. But none would be more well-known than The Fly, which was a short story originally published in the June 1957 issue of Playboy magazine.
Of course, Aleister Crowley read it, was like, dude, this is messed up. Something's wrong with you, man. Come on. What's going on in that head of yours? And the story, like I saw David Cronenberg talking about it. He says he doesn't consider it that well written or anything, nothing special. And this is like the thing he's most well known for, of course, like you said. And, he does call this one high concept, that he actually just hit one of those perfect things that, well, now it's spawned a few movies and it's probably going to spawn a few more before it's over with. So,
and the interesting thing is that, like, one of the aspects of Cronenberg's version is the idea that you're splicing human DNA with fly DNA, right? And those genes are getting spliced together. The idea of DNA didn't exist when the short story was written, or when the original film.
Yeah, that probably wasn't even the concept in his brain. Like he didn't really know how that would ever work. It just, that
it's like he was years ahead of the science almost, in the way that he imagined it. So when Charles Edward Pogue began writing the new adaptation of The Fly, or when he began working on it, when he gets approached by this producer and his agent, and they bring him the original story. They're saying, hey, we'd like you to work on a new version of this. He first, of course, read the original story, and then he watched the original film, which he had never even seen. And he kind of becomes familiar with the source material, decides he's going to try to tackle the project. So he approaches a young producer at 20th Century Fox named Stuart Kornfeld about getting the ball rolling on it. 20th Century Fox owns the rights to the original film, so they're the ones who are going to have to produce this. Kornfeld quickly agreed. And then the duo pitched the idea to the executives at 20th Century Fox, who were pretty enthusiastic about it. They were enthusiastic enough to put up a bit of money to pay Pogue to write the first draft of the screenplay. So initially, he kind of followed the outline of the original film, but then Pogue and Kornfeld thought it would be better to kind of rework the idea to focus on a gradual metamorphosis instead of the scientist instantly becoming a monster. As Kornfeld put it, he didn't want to make a head swap movie, which is basically what the first movie is.
Yeah.
He wanted to show the transformation over the course of the film. But then they show studio executives at Fox the first draft, and they sort of hated it. Like, they were so unimpressed that they immediately withdrew from the project. But Kornfeld, being a pretty good producer, he kind of starts to negotiate with them, and he is able to convince Fox to distribute the film on the grounds that he could set up financing through another source. So basically he's saying, hey, if I can get the money together, will you guys use your resources to send it out? And the new source of funding came from what seems like a pretty unlikely place, which is Kornfeld's mentor, Mel Brooks. So we're not going to get into a lot of history on Mel Brooks. You guys know who Mel Brooks are, right? Our listeners probably know who Mel Brooks is.
Yeah.
And also, that's a lot to cover. The dude's like 100 years old, and there's a lot of life there. We're going to have to do a whole series on Mel Brooks one day on this show. But for those who don't know the name, Mel Brooks is, I don't think it's too much to say, one of the funniest men to ever live. Mel Brooks is he's comedy royalty. He's the writer-director behind such classic comedies as The Producers, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, Robin Hood Men in Tights, if you consider that a classic. I do, but not everyone does. But needless to say, you hear that list of movies. Mel Brooks is not a name that you would normally associate with a movie like The Fly, but this wasn't really unprecedented. In fact, Kornfeld, so he had been working with Brooks in the past. He'd been an associate producer on History of the World Part 1, which is another Mel Brooks film. But he was also the executive producer on another unlikely film that Brooks funded, which was David Lynch's The Elephant Man. Which, if you've ever seen The Elephant Man, not funny. Not a funny movie.
I mean,
incredibly depressing.
He had set up the Brooks film thing just for this reason, though. I think he realized, that his name connected to things would make assumptions. And
yeah, absolutely. He didn't want his name on it because he didn't want people thinking that it was going to be a comedy, because they would be very disappointed if they went to see The Elephant Man thinking they were going to get a Mel Brooks style comedy. But yeah, this is probably a story for another series down the line, but they had seen Eraserhead, and that's what prompted them to ask David Lynch to direct The Elephant Man. And Eraserhead's a little funny, but not in a Mel Brooks kind of way.
Right.
Neither of the movies have anything like you'd expect if you just go in on title alone.
Right. Kornfeld gave The Fly screenplay to Brooks, the ones that Pogue had written, and Brooks liked it, but he felt that it might need to be rewritten by another screenwriter. He liked the idea of it, but he didn't love the full script. So he hired another screenwriter. Initially, he hired a guy named Waylon Green, who had written The Wild Bunch, great film, but they didn't like his draft. They felt like it was kind of not going in the right direction. So they brought Pogue back on to kind of polish up the script, continue working on it. While this is all happening, Kornfeld and Brooks are also trying to find a director for the project. They don't have a director yet. And the first choice was naturally David Cronenberg. They knew who this guy was. They knew that this material would work for him. But unfortunately, Cronenberg was unavailable because he was tied up working on Total Recall at the time. Their next choice was a young British director named Robert Bierman, who Kornfeld chose based on the strength of his short films. He had not really directed a feature at this point. He later went on to do, I think, Vampire's Kiss with Nicolas Cage. I think that's his biggest claim to fame, because as we know, he didn't end up doing The Fly. So Bierman gets hired. He's flown to Los Angeles to meet with Pogue. They were kind of just getting rolling on the very early stages of pre-production when Bierman's daughter, who had been vacationing with their family in South Africa, I think his wife's family owned a farm in South Africa. She was killed in an accident. Like, it sounds horrible. It was an accident on the farm where one of their kids like unlocked the brake on a tractor, and the tractor ended up rolling over their other kid, like an absolute tragedy. And Bierman, of course, immediately dropped everything, got on a plane to go to his family. And then Brooks and Kornfeld waited a month before asking him if he was going to be able to resume work on the project. Understandably, he wasn't able to go back to work so soon. And he told Brooks that. So Brooks is, he says, hey, we'll wait 3 more months. I'll contact you again, see if you're ready to go. After 3 months, that's what Mel Brooks did. And Bierman told him that, he still was not ready to go back to work. He was still processing this. And Brooks, of course, completely understood. And he just released the guy from his contract. So they're kind of back to the drawing board at this point. They don't have a director. They don't even have a particularly good script at this time, but they have a good idea that they knew is worth pursuing. So they're going to keep working on it. Then, as chance would have it, Stuart Kornfeld, he's in the hallways of 20th Century Fox. He meets with a fellow producer by the name of Scott Rudin, and he's kind of telling him this story, how they don't have a director. They're still trying to find someone for The Fly, and how they had wanted David Cronenberg, but of course he was tied up on Total Recall. And Scott Rudin says, well, Total Recall is kind of falling apart, so you might want to give Cronenberg a call again. So they did. And at this time, David Cronenberg's left the project, left Total Recall. They call him about The Fly, and Cronenberg was enthusiastic about it. He'd been considered for it before, but he liked the idea of doing The Fly, and he agreed to direct it, but only on the condition that he was able to rewrite the script himself without any interference. He would have to, he would still show the script to the producers and stuff, but he's writing the script on his own. And Kornfeld, he agreed, but he kind of reluctantly agreed to that, but just like that, Cronenberg's on board. We have a director. So Cronenberg goes to rewrite the script. And what he does is he basically throws out almost everything from Pogue's draft and completely rewrote it from scratch. He kept the basic concept. And oddly enough, the subplot about the main female character, who had a different name in Pogue's script, but about her becoming pregnant and then dreaming that she gives birth to a giant maggot, actually originated in Pogue's script. I don't think it was a dream sequence of that. I think it actually happened in that. But that seems like one of the most Cronenbergian things about the whole movie, and it did not originate with Cronenberg, which was a fascinating thing to find out to me.
Yeah, he'll say in discussion that he rewrote the characters and the plot, which he says sounds like a lot, but it's not everything. And there was a lot about the original script that he essentially liked and kept. He said he never actually honestly read a script before that sounded so much like himself. But he said definitively, like the love story, the seduction, the whole thing there is him.
In the original script, the couple was already married, just like in the original 50s film.
Yeah, he also says he hated that the scientist, even just like the first movie, the scientist loses his voice pretty early on. He wanted a scientist that would be articulate and able to express what's going on throughout the transformation or disease or whatever. He added the part about Veronica being a journalist because that gives an excuse for him to have to put everything into words and describe what's happening.
Yeah, because Goldblum doesn't lose his voice until the last act when his mouth literally falls off of his face.
Yeah. Right. I think in the commentary, David Cronenberg's like, and here he does finally stop talking. And he's like, but we're done with him.
But yeah, so he rewrites pretty much all the dialogue, writes all of the characters. He even fused 2 characters from Pogue's script into a single person, which ended up being Stathis Borans, John Getz's character. But he kept a few key moments, and I think most importantly, he kept the idea that the main character's transformation be gradual over the course of the film. Despite extensive rewrites, though, Cronenberg actually insisted that he and Pogue share a screenwriting credit because he felt that his version could never have existed without Pogue's draft as a starting point. This is very unusual, by the way, because that means he's sharing residuals on that with somebody else. Cronenberg, when you hear people talk about Cronenberg in interviews, they always say that how much of a professional he is. And this is kind of part of that. Like, he really felt that, he was building on the foundation that Pogue had written, even though he rewrote it. Like, the initial concepts were his. And I think that's super gracious of somebody. And it's something he actually had to go to the Writers Guild to kind of argue and fight. He wrote this. He didn't really have to argue and fight, but he wrote a very impassioned letter to them, telling them why he thought that Pogue should also have co-screenwriting credit on it.
No, that's awesome. It's very classy.
No. Yeah. I mean, he even says that it was that basic premise of a gradual transformation in Pogue's script that actually attracted him to the project in the first place. So if it had not been for that initial draft, he might have never signed on for this.
Right.
So we've got a screenplay. Everyone's pretty happy with it. There were some back and forth here and there with the producers, but it's pretty much what Cronenberg wanted to do. And with a script in place, Cronenberg assembled many of his regular crew members, names that you've heard over and over again on this series. Mark Irwin, Carol Spire, all these same people are all involved again on The Fly.
I had this funny hearing. I meant to mention before that just when he was rewriting the thing, he's talking about that he had watched the original and the things that bothered him as a kid when he watched it. He said he knows that there's like campiness involved and that has its own charm, which works on me personally. But he said there were two main things he had to fix. He says one was the proportions of the fly head, no pun intended, bugged him. He said he could never reconcile in his brain why, even as a kid, why the heads would just change size, why there's a giant fly head on this guy's body
and a tiny human head on the fly body.
Right. And he said the one that bothered him the most, going about it, something we were talking about before, he said in the original Fly, there's this shot that's from the POV of the fly, like looking at the guy's wife. And he says it's this
classic kaleidoscope looking image, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the fly's perspective. And you see, because the fly does have all these like little facets of like different parts of his eyeball. But he was like, as a junior entomologist, as I was at the time, I knew even as a kid, this is not how flies see. There's no inherent value in the repetition of the same image over and over again. That does not help an insect in any way. He says, so like a dragonfly, for example, has almost 360-degree eyes. Each facet of an insect's eyes is a different piece of a puzzle. It's a big picture. He's like, it was just so wrong scientifically to watch that.
What a fucking nerd.
I know. He was like, I was determined that in my movie, we would not make those mistakes. No kid like me was going to see my movie and say, yeah, but that's not how insects actually do this.
And yet his fly has eyelids.
Well, so he does talk about that. But yeah, he says, he said the thing he loved about Pogue was that he had actually already hit on this in the script. He was with the rethinking of the DNA, which actually was barely even coming into public consciousness at that time. He said that rethinking, the gradual transformation because of like fusing things together.
You can have elements from both. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so he does explain, like, for the fly at the end, he said the only reason that's that way is that he needed to express emotion. He felt like the fly had to have it. And so he justified in his brain, like, okay, well, most of him is the fly now, but he's still got Brundle's eyes.
Right. And, there's still some Brundle DNA in there.
Yeah, exactly. But he also said another thing that bothered him about the original is it's also set in Montreal. And he says everybody in the movie has French names, not French Canadian names, and French accents, which bugged him because
it is really weird.
He says anybody that knows Quebec knows that these are two different things, French and French Canadian. He says, so I don't know. Canadian nerds found a lot of strange things about these things. I don't know.
All right, so we're at a point where we've got a director, we've got a good script, we've got the usual suspects in Cronenberg's regular crew assembled. Now it's time to cast the film. So despite having a solid script and a director on board who had just scored a very big hit with The Dead Zone, casting the film actually proved kind of difficult because it was, after all, a remake in a time when remakes were far less commonplace than they are now. I mean, they existed, obviously, but they weren't all the rage like they are now.
Right.
It was also a remake of what was considered a B picture by many, although the original, which, as I mentioned before, was shot in color in CinemaScope, it was certainly not treated like one upon release, although you could probably say its sequels were B movies. But then there was also the prospect that whoever you cast as the lead would have to sit in the makeup chair for hours. And a lot of actors simply don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Which I get. The producer's first choice for the lead was John Malkovich, who pretty quickly passed on it. I think because of the makeup thing, although imagine this movie with John Malkovich as the fly. Pretty good. John Lithgow also passed on it. He called it icky and grotesque. It was not something he wanted to do at the time. Mel Brooks actually wanted Pierce Brosnan, but Brosnan passed as well. I'm not sure I can imagine Pierce Brosnan, although he probably would have done okay in this.
Interesting.
Ultimately, of course, the lead role went to Jeff Goldblum, and now it's hard to imagine it any other way. And that was actually against the wishes of the executives at 20th Century Fox, because Goldblum wasn't like a big star. I mean, he had done some movies, he was known, although I don't know that he had the lead role in anything. And they're also looking at this guy going, he kind of already looks like an insect, you know, probably like a big praying mantis.
Chris Wallace, who we'll
legs,
talk about
long
more,
arms.
he said that he felt his face would be difficult to work with for the makeup effects and stuff. Something about Goldblum's face.
Eventually, Kornfeld and Cronenberg, they fought to keep Goldblum in the role, and the Fox president at the time, Larry Gordon, eventually conceded, saying it was, quote, their mistake to make, which I can't imagine a studio executive saying that now.
Right.
It's your funeral kind of thing.
Cronenberg definitely says that makeup thing was the huge part for like a ton of those guys. Like they thought they'd get lost under the rubber stuff, and Jeff Goldblum looked at it as like a big challenge. Like he wanted it really badly. Like he really did, because they looked at guys like I know who you just mentioned, but they like Michael Keaton, Willem Dafoe is in there, Richard Dreyfuss, John Travolta. It was so like Mel Gibson was like really close and went with Lethal Weapon instead.
Wow.
Just
to imagine we're in an episode of Scanner, or was it Sliders? Remember? We slide to an alternate universe where Mel Gibson chose this instead.
Right.
And then we got to figure out who would have
Jeff Goldblum.
Riggs. Jeff Goldblum plays Riggs. Yeah. John Malkovich.
To further hammer home the idea that it's not very comfortable, over on Computer Resume podcast, available now wherever you
never heard of
podcast. It. Yeah, you've never heard of it. But we just finished talking about a season 3 episode, which had one of the guest stars was Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And he plays this alien creature who's, of course, covered in prosthetics.
Sure.
He has gone on record in interviews saying that experience in the makeup chair on Star Trek, he came very close to quitting acting altogether.
Yeah, some actors just hate it. I mean, they hate acting through the makeup. They hate the process of getting the makeup put on. I don't know that. I mean, I'm not an actor, so I can't speak to the acting through the makeup part. But the idea of sitting for like 4 or 6 hours just perfectly still while stuff gets put on your face sounds miserable to me.
And Jeffrey Dean Morgan's experience was in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
that's 20 years removed from the process as it was in the mid 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, some actors just thrive. I mean, then you've got guys like Doug Jones who have made an entire career out of it, and I mean, Doug Jones is one of the greatest of all time at emoting through prosthetics.
Yeah,
if not the greatest of all time.
Check out Star Trek Discovery, Justin.
I know he's on there.
He's great.
He and Doug Jones are old friends.
Yeah,
not really. We met once. He was very nice.
The good part for Goldblum, and we'll talk about her more too in just a second. But DC definitely said that's what I call him now. DC.
You're tight with DC.
Yeah, nice. You know me. He
stupid.
He said that Goldblum, while he was sitting there for the thing, that one of the great parts for him was that, Gina Davis and said that she would sit and read to him and sing to him and stuff while he's sitting in the makeup chair. Yeah.
Well, at this point in his career, Goldblum is about, he's like a decade into his career. The Fly, of course, is his biggest role to date. He had made his big screen debut in 1974 with a very small role as Freak number 1 in Death Wish. He gets, for director Michael Winter, he gets beat up by Charles Brosnan, I believe, or shot. I can't remember. He had a few other small roles over the next few years, including reuniting with Winter for The Sentinel, and also in Woody Allen's Annie Hall, both of which also featured Christopher Walken in small roles. So another little Cronenberg connection there.
Nice.
Just for the record, I don't think that Jeff Goldblum does die in Death Wish. I think that
does he not? I can't remember.
He rapes Charles Bronson's wife and daughter and then just leaves.
He doesn't get revenge.
I don't think Charles Bronson, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think he ever actually finds the people that did it. He just goes for vengeance because he's just pissed off in general.
Let's do a Charles Bronson series.
We should.
Just do like all the Death Wish movies and 10 to Midnight and all that. All
and
the
then get into
canon
the
shit.
Indian guy or whatever. I forget where he's from. The guy that like looks like him now. That's like the dead ringer for him that does movies.
And then there was also, we talked about the Bruce Lee, the least Bruce exploitation movies back in our Bruce Lee episode when we were doing Kill Bill. And there's a guy named Bronson Lee who's really just a Japanese guy with a mustache, but he's a badass. But he only goes as Bronson Lee in like one movie. Goes by his real name in others. But yeah,
and then there's Bronson with Tom Hardy.
And then, yeah, sure. That you got to save that for a Nicholas Winding Refn series, I guess. Anyway, we've gotten off subject here. Where were we?
Have we?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the cast. Okay, Goldblum. So he does The Sentinel. He does Annie Hall. Then he has a much bigger role in the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which, if you've been listening to the series, also featured Dead Zone star Brooke Adams. So there's a lot of fun connections here. In 1985, Goldblum appeared in 3 movies. One was Into the Night, the John Landis film that featured David Cronenberg in a small role. The others were Lawrence Kasdan's Silverado. I think he'd been in another Lawrence Kasdan movie. I think he was in The Big Chill for Lawrence Kasdan. Lawrence Kasdan, of course, writer of Empire Strikes Back. And then he was also in a horror comedy called Transylvania 65000, directed by Rudy DeLuca, who coincidentally also worked with Mel Brooks a lot throughout his career. He co-wrote a bunch of Mel Brooks's movies. He's a comedy guy, but he directed this movie called Transylvania 65000, and one of Goldblum's co-stars in that film was Gina Davis.
Hey.
The two, they met there. Then they started dating. They'd eventually get married in 1987. They were married for 3 or 4 years, I think. But when Goldblum was cast as Seth Brundle in The Fly, he actually suggested Gina Davis for the other lead role of Ronnie, Veronica, Brundle's love interest. Now, Cronenberg kind of had reservations about casting a real-life couple in the role, but he was convinced after Davis read for the role. In fact, he was ready to cast her immediately. They had not even seen anyone else. And Stuart Cornfield was like, maybe we should just try to see some other actresses before making this decision.
Yeah.
And they did, but nobody was as good as Gina Davis was.
They came close with, for what I read, Jennifer Jason Leigh and Laura Dern read, and there were some people. They came close with Linda Hamilton, who actually hated the script after seeing the part about giving birth to a giant maggot.
Oh, wow.
So like they were close, but then she was out.
Not quite. Well, that's funny because that actually ties into Davis's career in a funny way, because Davis was fairly unknown at the time. She had begun her career as a model. She was working as a model when she was cast in her first role, which is in a very small part as a soap opera actress in Tootsie. And then after that, she had some television roles and shows like Knight Rider, Family Ties, Remington Steele, before landing the lead role in a sitcom called Sarah, which only lasted 1 season in 1985. I'd never heard of it, so I looked it up, and it co-stars Alfre Woodard, Bill Maher, and Bronson Pete Show, from, what is it? What's that fucking show? Where he plays Balky, cousin Balky.
Oh, Perfect Strangers?
Perfect Strangers, yes. So she had actually mostly been known for comedy at this point. Gina Davis was, but it was actually during this time where she was doing all this television work that she auditioned for the role of Sarah Connor in the first Terminator movie.
Nice.
So they just kind of traded roles.
They got it off. That's good. Cronenberg was open to Goldblum because he thought he keeps saying like Goldblum was a marriage made in heaven for him. Like he just thought that he was perfect for this. Like he was geeky. He had that nerd side of it, but then he could become very athletic. He just had this. Plus, he loved that he was like 6'4", 5", something like that.
Well, it also helped that's part of what made them want to cast Davis in the role too, because they needed an actress who was fairly tall since they were going to be in so many scenes together. And Gina Davis is 6 feet tall. So
yeah, well, he 100% whatever he was like. What attracted me to it? I don't know. The idea of a woman who was tall, beautiful, eccentric, really funny. I guess that might be it. But yeah, and he said that was the thing with Goldblum was his eccentricities, his charisma. He said the thing is like even when he was talking to Goldblum, he was like he needs an actress that can keep up with him. That felt like a big part of it. And while they were like trying to figure it out, he was like when he actually met Gina, he was like, oh well, this explains everything.
Yeah, when they were filming some of their scenes, because they had been dating for a little while at this point, Cronenberg actually had to get Gina Davis out of the habit of talking like Jeff Goldblum. You know how when you're in a relationship with someone, you can pick up some of their cadences and stuff. Yeah. And Jeff Goldblum has such a very specific cadence to the way that he talks that she would just unconsciously start talking that way. And Cronenberg would have to be like, okay, Gina, let's do it again, but do it as Gina, not as Jeff.
Yeah. He said he kept having to stop her. He said, because, their first meeting at the beginning of the movie, but he's like, she comes in and she sounds more like his sister than somebody who had just met him. Like, they just seem like they've lived together their whole life. The beautiful part was, though, he said they knew how to flirt. So they were very good at that with each other.
And also, while we're talking about them, I have to say that the movie that they followed this up with is Earth Girls Are Easy, which I will go to bat for that movie any day of the week. I adore Earth Girls Are Easy. I love that movie. It's so much fun. And they're both great in it. She's especially great in it.
I did read that during the process of getting cast, and there was and this is from like 87 in a magazine called Sinister Image. I guess that's the movie he was on. And Vincent Price it was an interview with him. And he said that when the remake was released, Jeff Goldblum did write him a letter and said, I hope that you like this movie as much as I liked yours. And nice. Price said that he was very touched and he composed a reply. And then he went to go see the movie, which he described as, quote, wonderful right up to a certain point. Then it goes too far. Martin Brundle, by the way, I also thought this was interesting, just as an interesting side note. He's named after a Formula One racer.
Of course, it's Cronenberg being a car nerd again.
Yeah. And he said in this interview that he said a lot of his character names he actually pulls from like motorsports. And so I never knew that.
As far as the cast goes, that's honestly about it for this one. The Fly is essentially a 2-person show with some occasional appearances by Stathis Borans, who's played by John Getz, who is great. I just watched Blood Simple again for the first time in a while, and he's the lead in that, and he's very, very good. And that's actually what attracted Cronenberg to him, I think.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say Cronenberg had seen Blood Simple and wanted to use him immediately. And just for what it is, John Getz, he's like a trained stage actor from San Francisco. He was like, one of his earliest roles was Shampoo Man in a Johnson & Johnson commercial. No, that's not a cool superhero, by the way. It's just
Shampoo Man.
It could be. Not with that attitude, Gary.
But he's still going strong today. Like, he feels like one of those guys you just see around. But I saw some stuff with him. He said that he kept that rubber foot at least for a long time. The rubber foot that gets melted off, and he kept it in his fridge. And he liked to show it to his son's friends.
Nice. He's still working pretty regularly. I think he does a lot of TV these days. Like, he's done Better Call Saul and Doom Patrol and things like that. But he's in a lot of movies. He's in a few David Fincher movies, I believe. Zodiac, and I want to say The Social Network, I think he's in. But
nice. Also, I just brought him up just because this time around watching it, for whatever reason, he's got the look, the short trimmed beard, and so he looks like Walter Peck from Ghostbusters.
He's always reminded me of Walter Peck from Ghostbusters,
or that dude from Die Hard.
Man has
Ellis.
no dick. Ellis, yeah.
And, so he's obnoxious. He's an asshole. But he has to play him in such a way that he has this side of him that he does actually love Ronnie, and he ends up being sort of a hero by the end of the movie.
He's got a really tough role because he does start off as like this arrogant asshole who's kind of stalking her, because he like shows up at her apartment, and then he shows up in that department store. But then he's doing it because he does care about her. He's just going about things the wrong way, but he has to play it in a way where he's at least sympathetic enough to become the hero in the last act, which is pretty difficult to do.
Yeah. So I really appreciated him this time around, because I don't know. I've seen this movie a ton of times now, but Goldblum and Davis get a lot of credit, but I'm like, man, he actually, you kind of feel bad for him, especially from where he starts off in the movie. You're kind of like, by the end of it, like, fuck, man, this guy's trying.
Cost him an arm and a leg.
Got it. We also, Justin, we can't get out of here without talking about Typhoon. He's one of the stars of the movie.
Typhoon, the wrestler?
No, the baboon.
The baboon, that's his name. I was like, is Typhoon the wrestler?
Typhoon. Not a trained actor, by the way, if you couldn't tell. He's just a baboon. But
aren't most actors?
Yeah, that's true.
Trained baboons.
The only thing that kept him in check was the fact that Jeff Goldblum was so very large that somebody has to establish dominance. Like, he apparently went wild at the beginning, like even with the visual effects supervisor Hoyt Yeatman said in one of the documentaries on the DVD that he would get startled by the flashing lights in the telepod. He like broke the door off at one point to get out. Yeah. And
you can't train a baboon.
He got real horny about one of the script supervisors at one point.
Davis.
Yeah, no, the script supervisors. And he was going after her. And so the trainer or the handler said that if it wasn't for Jeff Goldblum, like, it would have been really a lot more difficult. But for some reason, Jeff Goldblum and his stature and his size, like, he was seen as the alpha, so he could control Typhoon and keep him in check. Otherwise, the ladies on set would have had a big problem with him.
I'm trying to imagine what role Typhoon the wrestler would have played in this movie. Probably the arm wrestling guy, right?
No, he would have been exactly in the same spot as the baboon. Like the big ass tugboat rolling around there just trying to hump people.
The arm wrestling guy, by the way, that's George Chiavallo. Did you look this guy up at all, Gary? He was the Canadian, a five-time Canadian heavyweight champion, and he had 93 professional bouts throughout his career. Never got knocked down, even though he fought Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman. He never got knocked out.
Whoa.
Yeah. I was going to say, it wasn't just fighting chumps. He fought Ali twice for the world's title, and
he didn't win,
losing by decision.
But by decision, but he never got knocked down. So that's impressive.
Cronenberg's also apparently a boxing fan. Which is crazy. Like, Cronenberg's like the nerdiest manly man.
Yeah, he's into cars and boxing, and but also like really into bugs.
Yeah, they attached an actual fly to a line on a fishing rod for Typhoon. By the way, when he's like messing with the fly, there's an actual fly there just on a fishing line.
How'd they tie it on there?
I don't know, but I swear to God, he says
what you do is you catch one, you put it in the you catch one in like a little container, and you put it in the freezer, and then that slows them down. And that way you can tie the string on them.
Before. That is really weird.
Then you let it go.
How about that, Todd? It sounds like you're speaking from experience.
I refuse to comment until I have my lawyer present.
All of the other roles, though, in the film are so it's essentially almost like a play. Like, it's two people with a third supporting character, basically. Then you get a few other little small roles. You do get Cronenberg regular Les Carlson as the the abortion doctor that they visit, and of course you get a cameo by David Cronenberg himself, fittingly as a gynecologist,
because that's where he belongs, is in between your legs. That actually came from, by the way, he had met Martin Scorsese, and after
they're buddies at this point, I think.
Yeah, Martin Scorsese had asked to meet David Cronenberg. He was a fan, and when he met him, Scorsese talked about how nervous he was to meet David Cronenberg, and Cronenberg's like, why? And he said, because I've seen your movies and I just wasn't sure what you'd look like or be like because of what you put on screen. And instead, you look like a Beverly Hills surgeon. And,
he specifically said a Beverly Hills gynecologist.
Oh, yeah, maybe it was Beverly Hills gynecologist. Yeah. And Cronenberg said he thought that was ironic because he's like, I'm talking to the guy who makes movies like Taxi Driver. Right. Like, what do you think I thought? But yeah, that's why he decided to give himself that cameo as the gynecologist of the thing.
So speaking of the cast, Todd, other than David Cronenberg, goddammit, are there any other members of this cast that might have popped up in Star Trek?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Typhoon the baboon.
No, you mentioned me.
No.
Come on, really?
No. I was going to try to play that off.
Oh, that would have been good.
But no, actually, since we've begun this series, David Cronenberg has racked up one more appearance as Kovich on Star Trek Discovery, bringing his total appearances to 7 on Star Trek Discovery. He's done a really great job. But other than that, That's it. That's
nobody.
Nobody.
I mean, it's a small cast. So.
I really, Gina Davis is, especially, there in the mid late 1980s, so beautiful. It would have been really interesting to see her as sort of a femme fatale who's like seducing people and
a lady Borg.
Yeah, lady Borg.
Sexy lady Borg, sexy lady Vulcan.
Yeah, something
sexy
like that.
Lady Klingon.
And it would have been cool to see
sexy
Jeff
lady
Goldblum.
Romulan.
I think like Jeff Goldblum as
sexy
an
lady
admiral. Yeah, sexy lady Tribble. To see Jeff Goldblum as
sexy
like
lady Gorn.
Now you can't tell in this scene, but under that mask is actually actress Gina Davis.
Actually, actress Gorda Davis. I don't know. Stupid.
But yeah, to see Jeff Goldblum, I think he would have been great as some sort of admiral who's been possessed by
Goldblum's a Vulcan. Come on,
okay, yeah.
I'd have to. I could see him being a Vulcan.
He could spout off like scientific nonsense, and he's got like just the look.
How great would it have been, considering the makeup work he did on Earth Girls Are Easy, to see him as an Andorian with big blue and the big blue antenna.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Well, man, we're coming up pretty short on Star Trek roles in most of this whole Cronenberg series.
Yeah,
Todd, you're fired. Between. We've got no segments for you now.
Sorry.
Surely Cameron's got somebody.
Hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
So when it came time to film The Fly, Cronenberg had one major policy change in regards to prep. Remember when we talked about Videodrome, Cronenberg made it pretty clear that he really disliked working with storyboards, which was a decision that made Rick Baker's job much more difficult than it might have been otherwise. Rick Baker's been pretty clear about that. For The Fly, Cronenberg reversed that decision to an extent. Cronenberg is still generally anti-storyboard, but because this was such an effects-heavy production, even more so than Videodrome, because there's puppetry and stuff involved here, he really had to plan things out months before shooting began. He would still stick to his no storyboard policy for any scenes that weren't effects-driven, like dialogue scenes, where he would just he prefers to choose his camera setup on the day of the shoot, kind of feel it out, But for the effects, he really needed a storyboard, and those effects. And the creation of the Brundlefly itself were the creation of a special effects artist named Chris Walas. So Walas wasn't exactly the first choice for this. Cronenberg originally wanted Rick Baker back because he'd loved his work on Videodrome, but Baker had already committed to another job, which is a movie called Rat Boy, which I had never heard of. And so I have to imagine that Rick Baker wished that he would have chosen The Fly. Rat Boy is literally about a boy with the face of a rat.
No,
I looked it up on IMDb. It's about a 3.5 rating on IMDb right now. So
so you're telling Rick Baker didn't make the
chance. I'm saying Rick Baker probably didn't make the best decision, but he got a paycheck for it, I guess.
Yeah.
Kornfeld had also met with Stan Winston and Rob Bottin, but neither of them were available either. So the job ends up going to Chris Walas.
He had apparently worked as like special makeup on Scanners. So
we mentioned him on the Scanners episode briefly.
I couldn't remember.
He worked under Dick Smith. He had gotten his start, like a lot of people that we seem to talk about on this show, and we'll continue to talk about, including on our next series, working under Roger Corman. His first credited film was on the Corman-produced, Joe Dante directed Piranha in 1978. He did the Piranhas for that. He'd also go on to do some of his most well-known work a few years later, working again with Joe Dante as the creator of the Gremlins and Gremlins.
Oh,
but yes, nice. he had worked in the makeup department on Scanners under Dick Smith, so he had some history with Cronenberg. Although on that one, he was not like the special effects, supervisor or anything. He was a little lower down on the totem pole.
I will say this. I guess his biggest connection might be Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he worked for ILM. And he actually
did a lot of work for ILM as well.
He does the melting face. Yeah. He does. He gets to do that again in this movie. So
yeah. So before joining the production of The Fly in Toronto, Walas and his crew of 30 people worked on designing over 24 different special effects special makeup effects, rigs, and puppets, all at his workshop, Chris Walas Incorporated in California. They began their work in September of 1985, only 3 months before the shoot was to begin. This is becoming a trend. Chris Walas, just like Rick Baker on Videodrome, wished that he had 6 months, but the effects world seems to be pretty volatile, and everyone wants 6 months, and nobody really ever gets 6 months that they want, it seems like.
Apparently at the time, like he was up for, like he said he had a conversation with his crew prior to production. He said, all right, listen, these are the options we've got. We could do this movie in this short amount of time, or we could do Gremlins 2, the new batch, which apparently was up for an option for him. He said that working on this one is going to mean having to come up with all the designs, construction, all that stuff. We got 3 months. And he said the crew unanimously agreed that it wasn't possible, but let's do it anyway because it's more of a challenge.
And you know who ended up doing Gremlins 2?
Who's that?
Rick Baker.
How about that?
So in addition to the 7 stages of Seth Brundle's transformation, they also provided the giant maggot baby puppet, the inside-out monkey, and the gore effects for Stathis's mutilation towards the end of the movie, you know, where his hand and foot get melted off.
Yeah.
3 months is very little prep time for the amount of work that was going to be required for this film. But to make matters even more difficult, they didn't have any access to Jeff Goldblum to do like a life cast of his face until October, leaving them even less time to work on the makeup effects. So they essentially had less than a month to actually construct all of the makeup pieces and suits that Goldblum would be wearing throughout the film. Since time was short, designing the Brundle fly became a sort of free-for-all where various members of the effects crew just went crazy coming up with designs. Chris Walas is like, everybody just, what do you think this needs to look like? Show me your designs and we'll figure it out. We'll choose which ones we like the best. We'll take them to DC, see which ones he likes the best. And most of the final makeup that we see in the film was the design of makeup effects supervisor Stefan Dupuis, which was another Scanners alum, with some input from some other crew members. So let's break down. I mentioned there are 7 stages to this Brundle fly. Let's break down the stages of Seth Brundle's transformation into the fly. So stage 1 is pretty subtle. This is when Goldblum's face looks like he's got kind of an allergic reaction or a rash.
Yeah.
So Stefan Dupuis simply painted the actor's face with some red and yellow and blue makeup. There are no prosthetics or anything involved. Stage 2 is pretty similar to stage 1, but with some warts and pimples added on, some prosthetic stuff added on. The biggest effects moment of this stage is when Brundle pulls off his fingernail, which leaves this gross looking like pus behind, super gross. So for that, they built fake fingertips for Jeff Goldblum to wear, molded after his own fingers. And they had tubes connected to syringes that would go through them so that when he pulled the fake fingernail off, they could kind of squirt the pussy looking stuff out. Yeah. Stage 3, Brundle, there's some more prosthetic involved here because Brundle's face is kind of lumpy. He's losing his hair. So Goldblum's got a headpiece on with a fake wig. For this part of the transformation, those prosthetics are covering most of his face and his ears, because this is where his ear falls off as well. So they're covering his ears completely, and that's fake.
God bless Roddy, who still gives him a hug at the end.
Yeah, she gives him a hug on the side that just lost the ear. So her face is like up against the ear hole.
Real gross.
It's really gross. Is this also the moment where he starts spewing the vomit, or is that the next stage?
I think it's right after.
I think it's around here. Yeah. And that vomit was made with like milk and honey and something else. Like, so it just sounded like disgusting to have in your mouth. Like a disgusting thing to have in your mouth.
Or what you want on your cereal. Just have like a little Brundle fly dispenser. Gross. He said Cronenberg did
from
say
Kellogg's.
That scene where she hugs, he was delighted at how, like, for some reason he didn't expect it, but that scene like got a lot of screams at screenings and stuff. Just that
she's putting her face,
her hugging him and putting her face there.
All right, so stage 4, Brundle at this point is barely recognizable. His head is very misshapen. He has a hernia like bulge on his left side, which develops into an additional fly leg later on in the film. But a lot of the footage from this stage was actually cut out of the film. I'll get into that in a minute. But so you don't see a lot of it. Stage 5, Brundle's head and body are lopsided. This is when he's almost completely fly at this point. Goldblum for this stage had to wear a full bodysuit, a full rubber suit. I do think the rubber suit is a little wonky effects wise. I think it does look a little rubbery. It's the only part of the effects that don't really hold up very well for me. Cronenberg in his commentary even, I think, comments on it a little bit where he's like, hey, you can't have a guy in a rubber suit without making it kind of look like a guy wearing a rubber suit. But on one hand, he's got 4 fingers and the other one has 5. So which is a very subtle little detail on that suit.
Yeah,
it's tough. He does wax poetic about like if you had CGI at the time and stuff, but then he talks about too that he wonders if in another 20 years if people are going to look back and think it seems barbaric, but he also needed the emotion and doesn't feel like you can get that with CG or ever. And
it's hard to. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, if you're doing motion capture and things like that, I think of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movies is always the first thing to come to mind for me.
That's true. And maybe when he's doing his commentary,
hard.
It's 20 years ago probably. So who knows?
Yeah, that commentary was like 2006. So Lord of the Rings had existed at that point. But also in this stage 5, Goldblum is wearing a magnified contact lens on one eye to make that eye look a little bit bigger. And then there's also a mechanical puppet that was used in this stage that's created by Wayless. It's got an extended lower jaw that kind of splits open to push out a fly tongue, and it also is what we see when he's like spewing a ton of that fly goop like on Stathis and stuff,
when he's murdering him or tearing him apart at the end. It's got like the thing with like 20 people under the floor like operating a puppet kind of deal.
And this stage 5 here for like the rubber suit and everything Goldblum had to sit in the makeup chair for like 4 or 5 hours every day. So stage 6 is full-on puppet, full-on fly puppet. This is the stage where the fully developed Brundlefly emerges from Seth Brundle's flesh. This is, of course, it's the most involved piece of special effects, and it's made of several mechanical puppets. So that transformation begins when Brundle and Stathis are fighting, which does, result in Brundle dissolving Stathis's hand and foot. And then as Veronica struggles with Brundle, she knocks his jaw off, and that triggers this big transformation where his skin kind of splits and this puppet emerges out of Brundle's skin. And the mechanical puppets that they used for that included a walking rig, which is this like waist down puppet. So for the scenes where you see where they're focusing just on his legs moving, that's a waist down puppet that was required 2 operators to move. There's the hero puppet, which is the full body puppet that required 5 operators. They had to control the full head, facial movement, 2 arms, and that 6th extra, fly leg coming out. And then there's a full figure fly that utilized a lumberjack rig mounted on an 8-foot tubular steel support system. And that took 6 operators, being the most involved of the entire film. And then stage 7. Stage 7 is what they refer to behind the scenes as the Brundle thing. This is Brundle's merging with the telepod itself. And it's super sad. It's a very sad moment. That required 8 operators working underneath the stage. And this is a full rod puppet controlled by hydraulics, cable systems, and an electric motor. That entire sequence is a puppet. It's incredibly impressive, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
and holds up, man. It really holds up.
And I think that's because, Cronenberg mentions how people would do this with CGI now, but I think I'm sure we've said this on the show 100 times at this point, but these practical effects just hold up better. Even though they still look like effects, they don't necessarily look real, but there's a weight to them. Yeah. In the back of your mind that there's something there on the set. Like this is an actual thing in front of a camera that's actually being filmed. Yeah, there are parts of it that you can't see, like the puppeteers underneath the stage and stuff, but there's a physical thing on the set sharing space with the other actors. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes a long way towards something just feeling more real to me, more so than, all the CGI stuff we see in like the Marvel movies. I love the Marvel movies. I'm not trying to talk shit about them, but they look like video games half the time, and they feel like video games. Like the stakes to me feel lower when everything on the screen is animated.
I can't agree that I can't agree. You can't agree more. That's it. Yeah, I can't agree. I can't talk. Really?
Are we gonna fight? Todd?
I refuse to agree with this.
Not all of Wallace's designs made it into the final film. Most infamously, there was a scene filmed with a monkey cat hybrid that was cut out. You can find these deleted scenes. I think they're on the Blu-ray. They're probably on YouTube and stuff too. But that also meant because they cut that out, they had to cut out a lot of the footage of the fourth stage of Brundle's transformation, since that's when he wrestles with this mutated animal. The reason they cut it out is because Cronenberg felt like it didn't work with the Brundle character. They had done some preview screenings where this scene was still in there. Based on comments from people, Cronenberg kind of decided that it made it feel like Brundle was cruel to animals, whereas Brundle, before his transformation and stuff, he's not a bad dude. He's a good dude. He's got some issues. He's got some hangups for sure, but he's not a bad dude. And this scene made it seem like, oh, he's mutilating this poor animal.
He's smashing a kitty.
Poor animals. Yeah. So they cut it out.
They also had one where it was like a homeless woman who sees him digging through the garbage at one point, that he ends up murdering her. And they cut that out as well.
What are you talking about? Is that true?
That's true. Yeah.
Brundle murders a person?
Yeah. In the movie, there's a deleted scene where he's like digging through the trash. A bag lady like comes along and sees him and is like, what the hell? And then he gets up and goes and like grabs her and barfs on her and eats her.
Wow. I did not know that one. And that's, I see why they would cut that out, because that makes him incredibly unsympathetic. Whereas then by the end, that last scene where he's like, very pitiful, it'd be hard to really sympathize with him if he's a straight up murderer, because he never kills anybody in the movie as it is. Even Stathis survives. He's just, maimed, but
and I may be wrong that it's like, I don't think it's a deleted scene on the film, but it's definitely one they shot. I definitely remember Cronenberg talking about it.
The majority of the movie was shot on the sound stages at Kleinberg Studios in Toronto, of course. Some of the most complex scenes to shoot were those where Brundle gains the ability to walk on walls and ceilings, where Veronica shows up to his apartment and he's up on the ceiling talking to her. It's a cool scene. And to achieve this, they used a pretty old trick of a rotating set. So I was curious, because we've seen this used before, but I was curious as to where it originated. I couldn't quite find out where it originated, but my best guess, the earliest instance that I could recall, was in a 1951 Fred Astaire film called Royal Wedding, which was actually directed by Stanley Donen, who, if you might remember, almost directed The Dead Zone.
Oh wow,
yeah, he also directed Singing in the Rain. Which I saw after we recorded our Dead Zone episode. I went to see Singing in the Rain on the big screen. Man, I adore that movie anyway, but seeing it on the big screen was something else. That's
cool.
Highly recommend it.
Nice.
So in Royal Wedding, Fred Astaire appears to defy the laws of gravity by dancing across the floor and ceiling. It is an incredible scene. Look it up on YouTube. If you look up Fred Astaire Royal Wedding on YouTube, it'll probably be this scene. It's the most famous scene in the film. And it's an incredible piece of filmmaking, and also of Fred Astaire's talent, because you never once think that this is a guy who's struggling to like keep balance, which is what he's doing, because he looks, it's so effortless. It's so good. But to achieve it, the entire set was built inside of a giant gimbal, which gradually rotated the entire stage, and the camera rotates with it. So the camera is attached to the set. And in fact, on Royal Wedding, I think they attached it to like an ironing board and like nailed it to the set. So it's early 50s, So the whole set is moving inside of what picture like a dryer, like your dryer at home, that like a cylinder like that's moving inside of it, with the set inside of the cylinder.
Oh, and 100%, by the way, Cronenberg said they watched Royal Wedding.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. In the commentary,
I didn't even know that. But...
that they watch Royal Wedding, and that's where they pulled this from.
Because it's a classic scene. And like I said, I don't know that it originated there, but that's the earliest that I could find. It was used again. I mean,
it's
Stanley
been done
Kubrick,
quite a Yeah, it's been done.
Stanley Kubrick in 2001, where Bowman is jogging in zero gravity. That was done using a variation on this. Tobe Hooper in Poltergeist, or Steven Spielberg, depending on your point of view. But the scenes where she's up on the mom's up on the ceiling, Wes Craven does it in A Nightmare on Elm Street, where you've got the blood pouring onto the ceiling. And for a more, what's that?
Jamiroquai.
Jamiroquai. And I think Jamiroquai just used a moving floor, right? Was it
Billie
I don't
Eilish. Billie
remember.
Eilish, however, on her performance on SNL.
Yeah. Which and that one, when they actually zoom out, you can see
actually
the
see
whole
it.
set. Yeah. It's really cool. For a more recent example, as far as movies go, look at the hallway fight in Christopher Nolan's Inception.
Yeah. I was just thinking they did that in Inception too, man, and it looks dope.
It's
Why
cool.
did it
It's
sound
cool...
like you just started smoking weed right then. Anyway,
what?
But anyway, this isn't a new or even unique way to pull it off, but it is still highly difficult just from a technical standpoint, because not only do they have to build a set that rotates, but they have to decorate it, and anything from table lamps to candy wrappers that could fall when the set is rotated had to be secured. And then they have to choreograph how to have Jeff Goldblum move around the room. So remember, at this point in the film, this is when Brundle is sort of eating a lot of sugary sweet food. So his apartment is actually covered in like candy wrappers and donuts, and they had to put like some sort of some sort of material like on the candy wrapper so they wouldn't flutter, as gravity pulled them to kind of harden them. It had to be incredibly difficult to pull off. Yeah. It's not like, if you watch Royal Wedding, as impressive as it is, the room itself is very static. There's a chandelier hanging from the ceiling, which they made to where it would, not move. But it's a room filled with like just furniture. There's nothing
big
on
furniture.
The tables.
Yeah, that's like nailed down.
Yeah. So as long as we're talking about set design, though, the other thing we have to comment on, I think, is the telepod itself.
Mm-hmm.
They were originally designed to look more like what Cronenberg described as high-tech Italian phone booths. That was what he instructed them to make them look like.
Yeah, they're going to have a lot more glass, and I mean, in the original movies,
yeah.
they're like these glass containers, that you could walk.
So the original idea for this was to be a little bit more like the original movie, but when they turned in the designs, Cronenberg didn't like the results, so they kind of asked him like, "Okay, well, what do you want?" And he told them to go to his garage, because remember, they're in his hometown. They're like 10 minutes from his house, and look at the engine of his Ducati motorcycle. Because remember, Cronenberg's a gearhead. He collects motorcycles. Carol Spire ended up designing the telepods to look like the Ducati cylinder turned upside down. So if you look at it and go Google what a Ducati looks like and look at the engine, and you'll see the telepods there. They just added some doors to them, but that's exactly what it looks like, even color and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't dawn on me until you said that. I'm like, oh yeah, that absolutely looks like an engine.
Yeah, he said he found the original design kind of boring, and then he just felt, like you said, it should look more like a machine. And he said that within an hour, like Spire and her team had like pulled it out and taken it to the workshop and designed the whole thing. One of the things I love with those teleportation things is that he described that I had never thought about before, but he does like motion shots for the teleportation to just give it even more of an effect. So like
motion control.
Yeah, motion control.
So
they're like automated, like these camera shots, and so you have to shoot it twice. Exactly the same.
Well, what motion control is basically you do a camera movement and a computer records that exact movement, so that when you go to do it again, it can be the exact same, a replication of the first shot. So you can do one with Jeff Goldblum in the shot or the monkey or whatever, and then do another one and kind of merge them.
So you can essentially, like have it dissolve into him, the one with him not there. And so, like he just disappears while the camera's moving, and it's just kind of wicked.
Which was something that wasn't possible just a few years before The Fly.
Yeah, I love that. Also worth mentioning, I guess, is this is Denise Cronenberg's first gig, I think. That's his
Is this the first
sister.
one?
Yeah, I think this is her first one, and she's a major player, wardrobe design on a lot of different things for a while, but of course all of his stuff from
she does all of his stuff, a costume designer,
which is probably pretty easy for Seth Brundle, because he of course just wears the same thing over and over again,
right?
Which is actually a common theme. He says he got Cronenberg says he got from other high performers. Like he mentions he stole it from Einstein specifically. That's
what Seth Brundle says.
Oh yeah, I guess he does say that, doesn't he? So but you see it with guys like Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg.
I think Cronenberg does it now.
Yeah,
too.
and he said they just wear the same outfit so they don't have to use any brain power to decide what they're going to wear. He said that he has actually adopted this himself since this movie, but he says mainly because he's lazy. And, he said actually another thing I thought was interesting about this shit. He said this is the only one he didn't lose or didn't gain weight on. He says every shoot he'd had up until this one, he's gained 15 to 20 pounds on. Because
why not on this one? He was just grossed out, couldn't eat because of all the goop.
No, it's because he says he always kind of fuses with his lead actor. And so Goldblum was his lead actor, and Goldblum was pumping athletic iron in between every shot at his trailer. So he started working out too. And so he ended up in pretty good shape by the end of this movie, which is interesting. He said that Jeff was actually in way better shape than you think. Like, they brought in gymnasts, for all those shots with the magical bars that you could do gymnastics on that appear in Goldblum's loft. But he said that the gymnasts were actually impressed with Goldblum because it actually helped a lot, but he could start those movements out. Like like
when he's on the chair, the first part of that is actually Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, like he could actually do them. And
then the next shot is a guy who's like a foot shorter than Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, he said that was definitely the hardest
really
part.
Tell in the movie, but gymnasts are not 6'4".
No. He said they were getting like the largest gymnast they could find, but still he was like Goldblum. And they have to do like multiple takes. So like gymnasts are used to like training to like get the movement down and land it like once, and they need the shot like 30 times. And so he's like, so we're running through gymnasts. He's like, I think I blew through like 20 or 30 gymnasts on this shoot or something.
So real quick, I want to mention, we've mentioned him a few times, but Stuart Kornfeld, who was the producer on this, he actually passed away in 2020 of cancer, I believe. But Stuart Kornfeld has had a long career. I mean, he got his start working, with Mel Brooks. That was kind of the beginning of his career. But I think he's probably best known for he actually worked. He started a production. He was business partners with Ben Stiller and Ben Stiller's production company, Red Hour Productions. So he produced obviously a lot of Ben Stiller movies, Dodgeball, Starsky and Hutch, Blades of Glory, Tropic Thunder. The Tom Cruise character is actually partially based on Stuart Kornfeld and Tropic Thunder.
Doing the dance moves.
Maybe. But here's something that you might like, Todd. The name Red Hour Productions originated in a Star Trek episode called Return of the Archons from 1967.
Oh man, yeah. Okay, all right, yeah.
He's a big time producer, but he did unfortunately pass away a couple of years ago. But long, very successful career, and the production company still exists with with Ben Stiller running things. But he was a big part of getting David Lynch's career off the bat and moving kind of David Cronenberg into a whole new direction. It feels like. So nice. I just wanted to give him a few props. He was also friends with Frank Zappa during the time that they were making The Fly. Which is wild anyway, that you're just hanging out with Frank Zappa. In interviews with him, he's even like, I know that sounds crazy, but I was just hanging out with Frank Zappa at the time. And they were at Frank Zappa's house, and Zappa, they would like he'd go watch movies at Frank Zappa's house and stuff. Like, they were buddies. They'd have movie nights. Can you imagine having movie nights with Frank Zappa? But they were there at the time that they were making The Fly, or they were about to make The Fly, I think. And Frank Zappa just hands him a tape and says, here, this is the score for your movie. And this is before the movie's ever completed. Like, they're not looking to make a score yet. And the thing is, people had been trying to get Frank Zappa to do a film score for years, and he always said no. And at this point, the movie doesn't even exist, and he just hands him a tape with a bunch of music on it saying that, here you go. Of course, Kornfeld had to run it by David Cronenberg, who, as we know, has a long-standing relationship with Howard Shore. So the Frank Zappa score never happened. But just imagine if this movie had been scored by Frank Zappa. It would have been a different experience, that's for sure. It's already kind of a different experience compared to other stuff that Howard Shore has done for David Cronenberg, because I feel like in some of his earlier stuff, it's very almost like synth driven, very otherworldly and weird. And for this, they're going for something deliberately like very operatic, to a point where like they were watching certain scenes and Mel Brooks and Stuart Kornfeld are like, is this a little over the top? I mean, Jeff Goldblum's just walking down the street here. and this big bombastic score comes on, but Cronenberg wanted that big over the top operatic feel.
He would say, no, he's headed to destiny. It's
right.
important. Yeah. This is he's headed to destiny with his jacket with no shirt on and high-waisted khaki pants.
Yeah.
I think it's one of Howard Shore's best scores for a movie, at least outside of the Lord of the Rings movies. I think that it's pretty incredible. And the theme to The Fly, I feel like, is pretty iconic at this point. I mean, it's a really great theme. I feel like movies need more themes like that, but it's instantly recognizable if you've seen this movie, I think.
Well, and it's fitting, like you said. I mean, the idea, even the setting of the movie, Cronenberg talks about a lot. The idea of Seth's lab and home in a loft, like this old used place, was unusual at the time. It's like a kind of a common theme. He's like, but at the time, that wasn't really something that a lot of people did, and he was always obsessed. He says that one of the things that drives him in movies, and you can go back and look at stuff now and see it, like from the kids in the barn and stuff and the Brood and like all this other stuff. He said he loves rethinking of a device or structure, like to whatever it's been used for before, like how you can reimagine it to appeal to something else. But he said they knew that from the beginning, that this space would be where most of the movie is. And it's a small cast, 3 to 4 characters, if you count the baboon, all in this one area. and that's what we wanted from the music, he would say, is like not over the top, but not restrained in any way. And he said, and then there's this love story, and then the love triangle that happens. He said even at the time, like, he wasn't even sure that part of it was even going to work. And going back and watching it himself, he even says, like, wow, this really does work. And so much so, in fact, I mean, he was like, this is like an opera. This is like a stage play. Well, you can go on YouTube and watch The Fly, the opera. It exists. And
cool.
It's interesting, but kind of a cool concept.
So less iconic than Howard Shore's score was this song that was commissioned for the film. As was common at the time, the film's producers wanted a tie-in song for promotional purposes. Promotional purposes help sell soundtracks, etc. So they contacted Brian Ferry. Brian Ferry, I don't know if you know, he's the lead singer of Roxy Music. Love is the Drug, all that, The resulting song is called Help Me. The song's fine. It's kind of forgettable, but it's fine. It's not a bad song. But Cronenberg ultimately felt that it didn't fit the tone of the film. Brooks and Kornfeld originally wanted to play it over the end credits, and they kind of fought Cronenberg on it a little bit. So he screened the movie for them, and they agreed that it felt very out of place, especially considering how the movie ends, to go into this movie, to go into this song rather. Instead, the song ended up in the background of the scene in the film where Brundle's arm wrestling Marty in the bar where he's talking to the girl, it's the song playing in the background there. But there was a music video released that heavily featured footage from the movie. Did you guys listen to the song?
Yeah.
I think I sent you the YouTube. I think I sent you the YouTube music video. It's whatever. It's fine, but I cannot imagine it actually being at the end of the movie. It would have been a whiplash at the end of this movie.
Well, and DC even talks about in the film, the ending of the movie was such a thing for them anyway. Just besides the song, they had like all these alternate endings they shot with Gina Davis actually being pregnant, or like waking up from a nightmare, or giving birth to a butterfly at one point, and like all these different things. But he said that like every screening they showed it at, just the ending that you have there with her having to finish him off is just so shattering for the audience.
That's not a good way of phrasing that, honestly.
Let's be honest. We all want Gina Davis to finish us off. Isn't that what we want, gentlemen?
Oh, yes. I mean, let's not beat around the bush.
Let's not mince words here. But anyway, also he said at the end, audiences, like, once that moment happens, everybody checks out anyway. Yeah. It always felt like nobody was interested in anything else that happened beyond that. So it was just like, okay, the movie ends here, which he says he admits is like, it was the same issue we ran into with Dead Zone. He's like, so this movie is the same finish as Dead Zone.
Yeah, not a lot of happy endings in Cronenberg movies, and I think it's fitting though the way that it ends, because this movie is sort of a chronicle of Seth and Veronica's relationship,
Mhm.
because the very first scene of the movie opens with him talking to her for the first time.
Right.
It literally opens on Jeff Goldblum's face talking to her for the first time. And then it goes through the whole arc of their relationship. And then it ends at the very end of their relationship, which is the death of Seth Brundle. So it's really fitting that the movie begins and ends with the beginning and the end of their relationship.
It's this. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk forever about the metaphors and the things it's been compared to, but in that aspect that you're talking about right there, it really does work like a couple going through the whole phase of like, and then even getting old and dying. Towards the end, he even talks about just like how bad he wants her to get into the telepod. It's like the old couple. It's like I need you to experience this with me, and I want to show you. And like that's the stuff he's thinking about when he was first making it. And I don't know. I love that. That's kind of interesting. He actually had a good quote. I think it was him that I read this at that said, every story is a tragedy if you watch it long enough.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That's great. So when The Fly was released at the end of the summer of 1986, it very quickly became Cronenberg's most successful film, both financially and critically. The film was the first of Cronenberg's to have a worldwide distributor with 20th Century Fox. All of his other films had been released overseas by different companies, and they'd been released by here in America. And its success was aided by a clever ad campaign that utilized the tagline "Be afraid, be very afraid," which is a line from the movie. And the idea to use it for the poster, Mel Brooks fully takes credit for that. By the way, he says that was his idea.
Yeah, Cronenberg gives him full credit for it. Says that they were on set, and like in that scene, Brooks was there and said something about the way Gina Davis was delivering the line. And like said, Mel Brooks was like, "No, she should be afraid. She should be very afraid." And they were like, and Cronenberg said he was like, "All right, let's use that."
Yeah, it's good. And it's become such an iconic, almost like cliche phrase that most people probably don't know it originated in The Fly.
Yeah.
I was wondering if this was the first use.
This is it. Yeah. Like, this is where it came from.
That's such a cliche. It did this start here. That's interesting.
The Fly eventually made about $60 million in box office receipts. And then in the months following its release, The Fly won an Academy Award for Best Makeup for Chris Walas and Stephen Dupuis. It won 3 Saturn Awards, including Best Horror Film. Mark Irwin won the award for cinematography from the Canadian Society of Cinematographers for the year of 1986. The film appeared on many Best of the Year lists that year, including Gene Siskel's, who placed it in his top 10. Remember, Siskel and Ebert are not always on board with horror in general, but Cronenberg they've been very hit or miss with. But in his review of the film, Gene Siskel said, quote, "As slimy and as grotesque as some of its special effects become, The Fly is a far superior horror film to the top grossing film in America of late, Aliens." So he's not only praising The Fly, but he's shitting on James Cameron's Aliens in the same sentence.
I saw they got double billed in a lot of places, like those movies, which is interesting. I did want to say too about the Academy Awards real quick. Chris Walas is the first name that's mentioned in the credits, in the end credits.
At the end credits before Cronenberg's name.
Yeah.
It says Fly a Creature or whatever by Chris Walas, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And they said after the first screening, the audience cheered when they saw that first credit come up.
That's great.
Stuart Cornfield turned to Walas and said, "You're getting an Oscar." And,
that's awesome.
And it was
cool.
Yeah. And Wayless claims that it was probably just because his name was listed first.
No, it's because he did fucking awesome work in the movie. Honestly, he deserved that Oscar.
Cronenberg says too, this was my first time at the Oscars, and quote, "It was fun."
Yeah, I think he had to sit in the balcony since he wasn't actually nominated, because only nominees get to sit down close.
Right,
so
right.
He had to sit up in the nosebleeds.
Yeah, and I was about to say, not even on like the first level. I think he said he was like several levels up or something.
So some other reviews. Patrick Goldstein of the LA Times said, what makes The Fly such a stunning piece of obsessive filmmaking is the way Cronenberg deftly allows us to identify with this monstrous creation. Richard Corliss, writing for Time Magazine, said, a gross your eyes out horror movie that is also the year's most poignant romance. So critics loved this movie, but there were some detractors here and there. Film critic for the New York Times didn't really like it, but the detractors were few and far between. But although this film was beloved by critics in 1986, and even though the film features on present-day lists of the greatest horror films, the greatest sci-fi films, hell, just the greatest films of all time, I'm willing to bet that there are some party poopers out there on the internet who might have some other opinions, because if the internet has anything, it's fucking opinions.
And party poopers. And you know what attracts flies?
Like Amber Heard, right?
Some poopers. Yep. Like Amber Heard. That's not going to age well for this episode.
This episode will be out in 2 weeks and everyone will have forgotten about it. Nobody's ever forgetting about that. Nobody's ever going to forget about the fact that Amber Heard shat in Johnny Depp's bed. It'll be on her fucking tombstone.
It's a power play.
Anyway, did you say somebody needs a nap?
Somebody definitely needs a nap. Amber Heard. Let's see. Rob here.
Listen, who hasn't pooped the bed?
Well, on purpose?
Well, not on purpose. Purposely. Well, you roll the dice.
Sometimes you feel, if you're here 10 years from now listening to this episode, maybe this right now that trial is happening. And they had 2 dogs, and they're little tiny dogs, like Justin's little tiny dogs, or maybe even my dogs. They're a little bigger, but they were like, "Are we sure that it wasn't for the dogs?" And Johnny Depp, the trial, was like, that poop wasn't for those dogs. There's something along those lines. It's like, it's very clear that was not the dog poop.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yes. Let's read some reviews, Gary.
All right. Some reviews. Here's one from Rob, who said the title of his review is Gross, but it inspired a classic pun. So what, you might be asking? Well, great. I'm glad you asked. He said, I saw this movie once. Never again. David Cronenberg seems to be going out of his way in this movie to gross out the audience. The problem is he mistakes revulsion for genuine horror and suspense. The movie has one redeeming value. It inspired what has to be the all-time classic worst pun in the history of the world, and it came from Bob Hope. And this is a quote. It says, hey, did you see the new movie, The Fly? Jeff Goldblum plays a mad scientist who accidentally turns himself into a giant fly. My favorite scene in the movie is when the scientist and his wife are sitting in a restaurant. The scientist drinks a bowl of soup and his wife turns to the waiter and says, waiter, there's a fly, or there's a soup in my fly. That's what it is. That's
wow.
Yeah.
That's not even a good pun.
Nope. Thanks, Bob Hope. This person is named it says, didn't need the bedroom scene nor the later language. Stop watching.
Written by my grandmother.
See you at church on Sunday.
Let's see. This is Nevea, who says, and it looks like this is where I draw the line with Cronenberg. This shit is gross. I almost made it all the way through, but the last 10 minutes, Jesus Christ.
Her name was Nevea. That's heaven backwards.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Here's one for Rihanna. What the fuck? I want him to vomit acid on my memory so I can erase the fact that I watched this in my mind. Liv says, how the fuck does this have such high marks on here? Bad script, bad acting, bad plot. Also, just gross. Also, the politics are so confusing. Is this pro-abortion? It's too bad to make any other statement.
I feel like a lot of these are just talk, and a lot of the reviews I found, a lot of people were giving it poor ratings because they thought it was gross, and that was pretty much their only argument against it.
Well, I was going to say, Justin, did you come across any instances of like pro-lifers being all upset or heard about it?
I didn't, but I didn't look that hard.
Half star here. This is from Allison. People need to stop rating this movie so high. She literally fucks a fly.
Technically, it's half a fly.
That's true. Annie says, no movie has ever made me as mad as this movie made me. I'm mad.
Well, all right.
I loved that one.
He's mad.
I didn't get this one at all. This is from Chayton Bobby. Haha, get it? It's about AIDS and how queer men with AIDS are literal monsters. Haha, so smart, so clever.
No, that's not what it's about at all. He's not a queer character.
I did not get that. I was like, what did this person watch?
What movie are you watching?
Let's see. Toby says this movie exists only for shock value. It capitalizes off of awful people. We were forced to watch this at camp, and it was the worst 2 hours of my life. They all wanted to make it super deep and metaphorical, but it's not. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is the Godfather compared to this movie. I was physically uncomfy because not only was it gross, it was bad.
Listen, I like Fallen Kingdom, and I still say that's a bunch of bullshit. Also, what camp are you going to where you get to watch The Fly? I went to church camp as a kid. We sure didn't get to watch this. We had to watch salty videos and shit.
This one is from a guy named Brett, and I had to read this one just because I feel like this is a person who wants to be a smarmy film critic, and this one made me
bad at it.
Kind of, I'm a non-violent person, but I wanted to choke him. Well, folks, here I am, dragged back into the world of internet movie reviews by none other than Mr. Kroll and Berg themselves. I personally could not get into this movie as it just wasn't very believable. Perhaps they should have taken a note from Chris, and then T in parentheses. They did like Christ. From Christ Nolan's The Batman movies and grounded this movie in reality instead of a made-up La La Land, a 2016, where Jeff Goldblum turns into a freaking insect and he still fucks. Chalk it up to me being an old soul yearning for the days of real blockbusters, but these new gore porn flicks just don't scratch my itch. My conclusion: wait for this to come out on your local Redbox and save yourself a trip to the cinema. Otherwise, you'll be flying to the customer service desk for the old 5-finger discount. A refund.
First of all, was that Gene Shalit? Second of all, what reality is this person living in where, one, this movie is playing in a cinema and then coming soon to Redbox, but in that same reality, the films of Christopher Nolan also exist?
That's crazy, right?
And also, anyone who calls Christopher Nolan Christ Nolan, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
And I say that as a fan of most of Christopher Nolan's films, but people who worship him are the absolute worst type of film nerds. And if you're one of those people, fucking at me. I don't care.
And finally,
Fight Club's probably your favorite movie.
Probably.
And I like Fight Club.
I was going to say, what's wrong with Fight Club? I like Fight Club.
But guys who say Fight Club's their favorite movie are usually pretty awful.
Fair enough.
And don't and they a lot of guys who, this is for a Fight Club episode. A lot of guys who say Fight Club's their favorite movie they idolize Tyler Durden and they don't know what the movie's actually about. Yes.
Right.
And they wear tap out t-shirts.
Yes.
No. Craig here wrote the final review for today, and this is for Justin mostly.
Thank you.
Yeah, first slide here especially. Took too long for him to turn into a fly, and even then, he didn't grow wings or eat any poo. There was a lot of unnecessary sex scenes, which made for uncomfortable watching. This was largely because I watched it with my parents and an old man that I had never met before. I'm not even sure if my parents knew him or even why he was allowed to come into our lounge room, but he did make numerous mother-in-law jokes throughout, which always go well with me.
It was a plot twist. It was David Cronenberg.
I guess so. I don't know. Weird one. But that one did reference eating poo. So
yeah, at least one of them. I thought there'd be more, but you know. Well, despite what these people on the internet have to say, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Fly is largely considered David Cronenberg's masterpiece. He had made great films before The Fly. We've talked about him here. He'll make great films after The Fly. Some of his best movies will come after The Fly. But this movie really feels like the culmination of his entire career up until this point. When David Cronenberg dies one day, The Fly will be the first movie that gets mentioned in his obituaries. Hell, the headlines you read on the internet will say, David Cronenberg, director of The Fly, dies at age 107. Hopefully, he's still making movies. Hopefully he's still around for a while.
Yeah.
But this is a series. We've been doing this series. This is 7 episodes. So 14 weeks now we've been working on this series of David Cronenberg movies. And it's all about his body horror movies. Mm-hmm. And even though his body horror phase only lasted for the first 10 years or so of his career, it's still the subgenre that he's most often associated with. Any discussion on body horror in general begins with David Cronenberg and usually begins with The Fly. Even though he did body horrors before this, The Fly really is like the ultimate body horror film. Like when somebody tells you you're going to see a body horror film, this is what you picture. It's an hour and a half of acid vomit and oozing, peeling flesh, body parts falling off, skin cracking to reveal some new horror underneath. Essentially, it's often about the flesh rebelling against its host, transforming into something unrecognizable. The Fly, if you looked up body horror in the dictionary, if you have a dictionary, The Fly would be the picture that you see.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And The Fly is, like a lot of those reviews mentioned, The Fly is a gross movie. It's part of what I love about it. Honestly, it's a gross movie. But as we all know by now, especially after doing all of these movies in a row like this, Cronenberg's never going to be satisfied with just grossing us out. That's not his thing. He even, has said multiple times, and we've mentioned it almost on every episode probably, that he never set out to be a horror movie director. He's not out to gross people out. He's not out to make a movie that's just gore. He's always got ulterior motives, other things to say. He's using the disgust that the audience feels when they watch Seth Brundle decay as a way of reminding the audience that not only of our own mortality, but reminding us of just how gross and weird the human body is, and how at any moment this stupid flesh suit that we're walking around in can turn on us.
Yeah. Oh man.
At the time of its release, there were a lot of think pieces, a lot of the reviews and things like that talked about The Fly being a metaphor for AIDS. Gary, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it's understandable why people would think that, because at the time that this movie was released in 1986, we were at the height of the AIDS epidemic. This was front page news, so it would make sense for someone to make a movie like this be a metaphor for AIDS. But Cronenberg, he accepts that interpretation, but he's pretty specific that making a movie about AIDS was never his intent. He often says that he is not a topical filmmaker. He's never going to make a movie that's about the times. When making The Fly, his intent was to make it not a metaphor about AIDS specifically, but a metaphor about aging and disease in a more general sense. Cronenberg says that it's about, quote, the original sin, the knowledge of your own finite existence.
Yeah, another quote from him is that this movie is about the inevitability of deterioration and death, finding the weird thing on your body that isn't right or isn't supposed to be there. It's about aging or disease, and not AIDS specifically. He says, I've experienced things that I was just anticipating at the time, and it disturbs me even now watching it back. It's about mortality. So yeah, he's talking about, I think in the commentary, he goes into you're even just the thought of it being scary that you're rubbing your arm one day and you find a lump that isn't the same place that it was, or it wasn't there before and now it is there. And it's even even if it's minor or just a bump, it's something's different and it's wrong. And it's just that kind of feeling that you get.
Bodies are stupid. Human bodies are dumb. They're poorly designed pieces of meat that your hair starts falling out, things start sagging and getting weird. Bodies are gross, and that's really what he's doing here is confronting you with the fact that you're in a piece of meat that's been decaying essentially since the moment you were born, which is a huge subject, obviously, and it's one that's worthy of discussion, and it's one that is often the subject of discussion surrounding David Cronenberg's body horror, and especially regarding The Fly. But there are other aspects of The Fly, one specifically that ties into the themes of death that gets discussed a little bit less. And what it is that The Fly is, and this is even according to Cronenberg, it's a love story. It's a tragic love story. It's a romance that ends in a pretty depressing way.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that too, because he talks about that, this story is so sad. I mentioned that one quote earlier, but he was saying that if this was a straight drama, this is not a movie that would get made. Nobody would want to see it. Yeah, he said two attractive, eccentric people who fall in love, they deteriorate. One helps the other commit suicide. He was like, that's too much of a bummer. He was like, this movie is protected by the trappings of the genre.
Yeah, he's absolutely right.
That's how we're able to have it.
Yeah, but it is a very human story. I mean, I think it's the most human of Cronenberg's films that we've discussed so far. Up till now, I would have probably said that was the Dead Zone, because that was the most character based, I think, of the ones we've talked about. The Fly almost feels like Cronenberg took the humanity of the Dead Zone and fused it, put it in a telepod with like Videodrome, with the gross fleshy effects of Videodrome, and came out with something that's better than both of those. That's fair. And we discussed on that Dead Zone episode that is a guy. It's a story about a guy with psychic powers, yes, but it's also really about a guy coming to grips with how his body and his mind are changing. And he's sort of doing the same thing here. The Fly is about a guy who's turning into a giant fly hybrid thing, but it's really about Seth Rundle's journey and how his body and his mind are being transformed. But it's also about, and this is something that the Dead Zone didn't really have a chance to latch on to. It's also about how that journey affects those around him, specifically Ronnie, because the Dead Zone couldn't do that because Sarah was kind of out of Johnny's life for long stretches of that, and she moved on with her life, and he was kind of having to deal with it on his own. Here, we're seeing it almost through Ronnie's eyes.
It is sad.
Yeah. So while Seth is going through this transformation, changing from one self to another, Cronenberg also explores what it's like to be in love with someone who's slowly becoming someone that you don't recognize. And this is all going to sound very depressing as I discuss this. But everyone's been through that situation, and I'm not even talking about watching somebody die. That's part of this as well. But I'm talking about where you're in a relationship with someone, be it friends, romantic partners, whatever, just somebody who, if you're friends with them long enough or you're in a relationship with them long enough, you can at some point realize that they're no longer the person that you initially connected with. They've changed either via the circumstances beyond their control or by poor decisions that they've made. People change, and sometimes it's hard to see somebody change into somebody that you can no longer connect with. And you kind of see that with Seth and Ronnie's relationship, because Gary, you touched on this earlier, but Cronenberg gives us this entire kind of romantic arc with them, right? You see them meet cute at the beginning of the movie. You see them fall in love. Then things kind of take a turn. You see Seth, he gets kind of jealous when he finds out the Stathis is still in Ronnie's life, even though they're not in a relationship. He gets jealous, and that jealousy causes him to make a very bad decision. And then after he's fused, genetically with the Fly, we also see hints at domestic abuse. They get in this argument where he punches the wall like a fucking true Kyle. And then, of course, there's the obvious physical transformation, but he's also changing mentally, because he is slowly mentally becoming more insect-like, which is more driven by survival. And he even says that in that great speech about insect politics, one of the best scenes in the movie, I think, where he tells her, he knows that this is happening, and he tells her to stay away or you're going to get hurt, because he's turning into this thing who has no regards really for her feelings anymore. Now, you take that same concept and you apply it to someone who's changing before your eyes due to something that's not their fault, be it cancer, AIDS, whatever disease you want to substitute in, or just getting old and decaying. You're watching that happen to somebody, and that's fucking heavy.
This movie has no right to be this heavy with some of these things, and like even the idea of like survival, like of the we're talking about it from Ronnie's perspective, but even from Seth's perspective, like the scene got me again this time on the rooftop when he captures her. We did cool scene, by the way. It's almost like a Universal horror movie where he's like carrying her.
Very,
But where he's like talking to her about the baby. Like, don't get rid of the baby. Like, that's the last part of me. Like, that's the only thing I have left. And, you know, I know people are like trying to spin this into like a anti-abortion or whatever they're trying to do in some of these reviews I read. But just that idea, like that feels like a genuine emotion. Like this guy's like saying, like, don't.
He knows his time is limited, and this is all he has like left to leave.
Yeah, this is all I'm leaving behind. Like, don't get rid of this for me. And I don't know. It's just sad.
It's very sad. It's a sad movie. Like I said before, it is a tragedy. It's a tragedy with a lot of cool like pus and goop and shit, but it is a tragedy ultimately.
It made me think of like everything that he went through, you know, with his divorce and all that.
Yeah,
you know, it's like there's got to be some residual.
It's possible,
stuff coming up in the making of The Fly. You know, watching somebody change into something you don't recognize.
And the weird part with Cronenberg too is, I mean, even after this, and especially after, you know, we're not going to get into all these, but you know, I was reading a few things that talked about even after Naked Lunch, like he strays away from his own original stuff, and he mostly sticks to literary adaptations, except for, and we kind of talked about this, except for like Existence. But you know, he still tries to stick to like some of the themes that he's really focused on, like some of the things that stay true, like sex and death, the body and mind connection, like just that I don't know, just the way that the mind can do so many different things and create so many different realities for you, but then your body is just this sack of flesh, you know, that like and I don't know, it's just like where your mind can take you versus like what your, I don't know, like your worldly self is trying to do. I don't know.
Well, Cronenberg has also said, I watched a really great interview. I didn't watch the whole thing because it was about an hour and a half long on YouTube, called Cronenberg on Cronenberg, series of interviews with him. But he himself has said that his run of body horror movies is really about the nature of identity. Now, this is a guy, David Cronenberg. He is an avowed atheist, very scientifically driven, does not believe in the afterlife or in God or anything like that. So he's not trying to find his identity through any of that stuff. He's trying to find it through a more logical mean. This is a guy who, you know, he can't brush away this stuff with any sort of religious mumbo jumbo. So he's trying to come to terms with the question of who am I through his films and exploring that. And what happens when, like, what is yourself once you begin this sort of transformation? You know, like, at what point does Seth Brundle stop being Seth Brundle in this movie? At what point is he fully the Fly? This is something that you know runs through all of his work. I mean, it's most, as far as the movies we've talked about here, it's pretty clear. But even, you know, Eastern Promises and A History of Violence, if you've seen those movies, not to slight spoiler here, but A History of Violence, if you're a hitman who creates a new life in a small town, are you still a killer? Are you still that guy? Yeah. Eastern Promises, if you're a cop who goes undercover with the Russian mob, at what point do you just become a fucking mobster?
Yeah.
Right. This is something that he explores throughout his entire filmography. And it makes me kind of sad that we're ending our talk about his filmography here. But this is all stuff that we'll get to talk about later on down the line. But as far as like the themes of this film, when you look, we talk about a lot of genre movies on the show. I mean, that's what we do. So that inevitably means we're going to talk about a lot of horror movies. And I think that confronting death is arguably at the heart of the entire horror genre. But what The Fly does differently is it shows us what it's like to confront not your own death, but the death of someone that you care about. Because when you die, you don't experience your own death. You experience everything leading up to your death, but once you're dead, it's done. It's over. You're like that. You don't experience the aftermath of that, right?
Right.
But what Ronnie is going through, when someone you care about dies, you are the one experiencing that. You're experiencing their death. That's what Ronnie's going through here. She's experiencing watching someone she knows die, and she's going to have to deal with the reality of him no longer being there. And horror movies don't usually deal with that kind of stuff. Usually somebody's done and they're gone. Like somebody gets killed by Leatherface, it's over in an instant. This is a slow death through an hour and a half of movie, basically.
I think Franklin went through a lot, like just thinking about all his friends dying in Texas.
Franklin was an asshole. We probably didn't give him a second thought. But you're watching Ronnie. She's watching Seth Brundle slowly fade away until there's nothing left of the man that she fell in love with at the beginning of the movie. And let's get it out of the way. Jeff Goldblum is incredible in this movie. His performance is a big part of what makes it work. And his performance combined with the work from Chris Walas is often the focal point of discussions on this movie. But what I don't think gets mentioned enough is just how good Gina Davis is in this movie, because she's really great. She really is the emotional center of this movie. She's the only character who's sympathetic from beginning to end. Seth Brundle isn't, and Stathis Borans, neither one of them are sympathetic from beginning to end in this movie. So it's through her eyes that we see the slow death of Seth Brundle. So we have to care about her enough because she cares about him. So if Gina Davis, if whoever plays Ronnie, if they don't work, the whole movie would fall apart.
Yeah,
I think. So I think that as good and as important as Jeff Goldblum is in this movie, I think Gina Davis is the emotional heart of The Fly.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's an accurate assessment.
It also makes it that much sadder at the end when she has to put him out of his misery.
Yeah,
because he's begging her to.
It is not
what a horrible fucking
kind of
thing.
I don't know. I'm getting soft in my old age, but it is not okay that I almost get like a little tear in my eye having to see, him put the gun up to his head.
It's sad. Yeah. It is sad. And it's
like a fucking monster putting the gun up to his head.
Yeah. And it should be sad but how many other horror movie filmmakers could pull that off?
Not many. That's
that's it. To make you actually care about this creature that's hideous and disgusting. Right. It's a really an achievement, which I think is why this is largely considered by most people who have seen the most of David Cronenberg's movies. This is usually considered the best and their favorite. And I think that's a large part of it.
So far, this is the best. I mean, in my opinion, it's definitely the peak of Cronenberg right now.
I mean, I think it's my favorite overall. I think History of Violence is way up there for me. I really love that movie, but I think it's hard to beat The Fly.
This just hit so many points. And then, I almost even hate to mention it just because of how deep you just got with, like, emotionally, but he talks a lot too about just that as he's reflecting on the movie about, he also thinks a lot about just people in general. I guess this kind of connects because he's saying, like, it's in our nature to question everything or to, like, change over time. And these, so we're always changing things or trying to adapt or be better, whatever. And every decision we make will cause some good, some bad. And so that's just the nature of life. You mentioned earlier, I mean, just I'm trying to figure out how to round this off, but you mentioned earlier, even like him being an atheist and that sort of thing. He's always trying to figure things out. He talks about as a junior entomologist. There's the line that he uses in the thing about, have you ever heard of insect politics? That's another big line from this movie. Mm-hmm. He was saying it was just kind of a little joke for himself, but because he's actually interested in insects, and he talks about, like, ants, for instance, that they live in a society. They're not human. Ants are clearly not humans. And he talks about, but they have a weird division of labor between their people. They will go and attack other colonies at seemingly random intervals. Like, they decide that these people have to go. They'll take slaves. They, like, capture queens and milk them. And, like, there's a weird thing about ants. They're not humans, but they do these things. So, like, what is their process? What is their thought? So there's, like, that side of it, which interests him about the insect side of things. And then there's also the thing he's talking about with, like, he talks about with DNA that interests him. And he's like, we've opened this Pandora's box of DNA. And he's like, it'll never be closed. And this is always in our nature to question everything, change everything. And it'll create a good, it'll create bad. And he's like, yeah, it's true. He's like, most of my characters come to terrible ends. He's like, that's just kind of, he's like, but you know, that I make drama, and that's what drama is. He's like, conflict is the nature of drama. So here we are. He's like, that's what makes movies. So he's like, it's not all bad. He's like, things go good, but you know, when things go wrong, that's when you understand how important it is for things to go right. And so it's I don't know. It's just interesting. I'm not even saying like a real point here. I don't think. I think I'm just saying things Cronenberg was talking about that I'm like, oh, this is
well, it just goes to show you just how thoughtful and intelligent David Cronenberg really is.
He really is. I was thinking as I was writing my notes on this, that the main character dies in almost every one of these movies that we've talked about. I mean, except for The Brood.
Yeah. Well, and even then, it's not like a happy ending because the daughter's like clearly the thing is passed on.
Yeah. So it's still a bummer of an ending.
Yeah.
But
so, and I mean, I guess that's what he's saying when he's talking about too. He's just like, I make drama. You know, that's movies. That's what I do. You know, that's just how it has to be. But like, I can't just make like the super happy. Like we cured all the disease. And
that's not his thing.
Good.
Yep.
So we forgot to do this on our Dead Zone episode, guys, but let's talk about further viewing. What the hell do you pair with The Fly? What's going to compare to this? Honestly, anything at all? Do you guys have any movies you would pair as a double feature with this one?
The Wolfman from 2010.
The Del Toro version.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think mostly because of the intensity in that movie. I mean, you've got a lot of similar themes of, struggle with identity. In this one, there's the element of it being sort of handed down genetically. An extreme change, an extreme, identity crisis brought about with some wonderful digital and practical special effects. That's how I'd go.
Okay. All right. That's I don't remember much about that movie. I'd like to revisit it. I just always kind of lament the way Rick Baker's effects kind of got cut out of that movie.
Yeah.
I would love to see the original version of that.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't because I don't have, the ability to jump into a different timeline.
But I mean, if you got to hang a movie like that on some actors, Benicio del Toro,
oh, he's great,
Anthony Hopkins, Hugo Weaving, Emily Blunt, those are all really solid choices.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think, Gary?
Oh, I got two good ones. Easily, and these are two movies I like very much, and I even found I referenced one of these in the last one, which is Hellraiser, because I said in our last time we recorded about The Fly, I thought it was so interesting because I watched it this time. I was like, David Cronenberg should make a Hellraiser movie, and I've decided that Hellraiser is for some reason the movie that I think all people should make. I don't know why, because I said it about the Wachowskis too, but it just feels like Cronenberg and the Wachowskis could both make a really cool Hellraiser movie. But Hellraiser deals with this kind of thing. I mean, in a sense, like people are playing with stuff beyond the veil, and they're like, I don't know. I feel like there's an experimentation kind of thing. Like people are interested in something.
It's very much about death. Yeah.
And then they play too far into it and they awaken something that really fucks them up. And so I like that one, but probably more closely, I would go Stuart Gordon, and I would say From Beyond actually is what I would do, because it's about science and they're playing around, and they can, and I said pierce the veil already, but they kind of do that to like perceive other realities or like other dimensions, I should say. Yeah. And that causes some real fucked up body horror in that movie. And anyway, From Beyond's probably an amazing double feature for this one, I would think.
From Beyond is actually one of the first ones I thought of, so I'm glad we're on the same page here. I love that movie. A big fan of it, but yeah, it is about science going too far and the consequences of that. Now, the other one, since you picked that one, the other one I had on my list was Tetsuo the Iron Man. don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Senya Tsukamoto. It's a Japanese filmmaker. It's a very like cool cyberpunk body horror movie from the late 80s, 1989, I believe. But it is, I don't know without looking into it how much that it was influenced by Cronenberg, but it feels like the type of body horror that came as the result of an underground filmmaker getting really into David Cronenberg. But instead of a guy being fused with like another biological being like a fly, it's about a guy slowly becoming metal, essentially, slowly becoming a machine. Wow. And it is rad. It is it's honestly one of my favorite movies. It is such a cool movie. It is just like, it's black and white, super grainy, very almost Eraserhead-esque in its cinematography, very, very low budget, underground, but just a magnetic film. And it's very short. It's an hour and 10 minutes long or something. And it's very, very fast paced the whole time, but it doesn't deal thematically with a lot of the deeper stuff that Cronenberg does, but just as an extension of what body horror can be. Tetsuo the Iron Man is pretty incredible. And it's also kind of a love story. It's kind of not as overt as The Fly, but it's there. So I would highly recommend watching Tetsuo the Iron Man. It's a rad movie.
Watching The Fly again, I don't know why it's not more popular as a play, like a stage play. Like it really,
it's only 3 people. Yeah,
it's like literally
other than the fact that doing the effects would be very difficult on stage.
Yeah, but if you watch like the YouTube thing, I mean, they have ways of handling it, and it's not too they don't go as crazy as David Cronenberg with their effects. So it's so you have to downplay those a little bit more and go with your imagination, as you do with stage productions in general. So The Fly, of course, is not the end of the road for David Cronenberg. He's still got decades of filmmaking ahead of him at this point, but it was the end of an era. While movies like Crash and Existence have some pretty overt references to the flesh, to bodies, this is really the last true body horror film that he ever made. Although the trailers for Crimes of the Future just came out. I don't know if it's even a remake of his original film or if he just took concepts of it. But if you've watched those trailers, if they're any indication, he might be returning to the body horror realm for this late stage film in his career, because it feels like he's playing with some stuff.
It looks gnarly, man. It looks really cool. I'm very excited for it. It'll be out just in a few weeks, actually, from the time of this recording.
We should at least do an episode on that.
We might do a little bonus review on it or something, and then devote a full episode to it down the line. We'll see. But this also wasn't the end of The Fly as a franchise. In 1989, a sequel to The Fly was released, cleverly titled The Fly 2. Cronenberg had no desire to return to the franchise. He's a guy who says that he doesn't like to do sequels. He's always said that. So the sequel is actually directed by Chris Walas, making his directorial debut. The film opens with Ronnie dying during childbirth, during which she gives birth to a larval sac, the result of her pregnancy from the first film. Gina Davis doesn't return because she didn't want to play a character that dies in the first 2 minutes and gets no character development at all. So she said no to this. And she was replaced by a Canadian actress named Saffron Henderson. In fact, the only person from the first film to appear, other than in archive footage of Jeff Goldblum, is John Getz, reprising his role as Stathis, only this time with a clearly fake beard on his face. Seth and Ronnie's son in that who is also named Martin Brundle. Remember, that was the inspiration for Seth Brundle, Martin Brundle, the race car driver. So they actually just went and named him Martin in this film.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So he's inherited his father's fly genes. And he grows at like this accelerated rate. Like he grows very, very quickly. Once he reaches adulthood or he looks like an adult in the film, he's only 5 years old, which make the sex scenes very uncomfortable. I can't remember her name in that, but I was watching that. I was like, he is a 5-year-old man. I know he looks like he's
not
30.
more uncomfortable than Big. Right?
No, it's on the same level. Honestly, it's on the same level. But he also like, he's incredibly intelligent and incredibly like emotionally advanced. It's a cool concept, and of course, by the end of the film, his dormant fly human hybrid genes have come out and he becomes a big fly creature by the end. which looks very different from the Fly from the original film, but whatever. The main role was offered to Keanu Reeves initially, who turned it down because he didn't like the script. Eric Stoltz eventually ended up playing the part. The film was co-written by Frank Darabont very early on in his career. And the sculptor for the film's effects was Tom Sullivan, who's most well known for his work on Sam Raimi's Evil Dead films. It's a lot of connections on this dumb little sequel. Did you watch it, Gary? Did you watch The Fly?
You were about to ask that. No, I never got enough time to get to the sequel to The Fly.
It's worth watching. It is nowhere near as good as the original film. Not even.
I'm in this deep. I mean, I'm going to watch it,
but it's worth watching, if only for the effects, because it is what it lacks in the gravitas and the character development of the first film. It makes up for in goop and pus and gross things.
Yeah,
the effects are really gross and really fun. And did you watch it, Todd?
I've seen it before. Yeah. Again, I think they would do the back-to-back showings on that Sunday afternoon. It has one of my favorite sort of creepy horror movie moments of the girl comes in to the room wherever he's at and is like, oh my God, you're getting worse. And it's silhouetted and you can see like a bunch of the bumps and stuff like that. And just really low, just I'm getting better.
Yeah.
It's like
good.
Oh shit.
And Eric Stoltz is admittedly no Jeff Goldblum.
Right.
He's fine, but he is no Jeff Goldblum. There's a reason that Eric Stoltz has never successfully.
This is why people have
like a
daddy complexes, Justin.
Listen, none of us compare to Jeff Goldblum. Let's be real. This man is incredibly intelligent. He is tall and handsome and eccentric in a way that is very appealing, and he's an incredible piano player.
Yes, he is.
He is. He's got an album.
Had to live up to Jeff Goldblum in this movie and Michael J. Fox and Back to the Future.
Well, no, I mean, he was there before Michael J. Fox, and they fired him because he wasn't good enough. So The Fly 2 was fairly successful at the box office, but it was decidedly less popular with the critics. It was not a critical darling like the first film. Wayless has only directed one other narrative film. I was curious if he had directed anything else after this. He did like an episode of Tales from the Crypt. He did a movie like in 2020 that's just about him. It's about making the Gremlins, basically. He made a documentary about himself. But the only other narrative film that he made was in 1992. He directed a movie called The Vagrant. I'd never heard of it until I started doing research for this. It stars Bill Paxton as, and this is word for word from the IMDb plot synopsis, as a businessman who buys a house but has a hard time trying to get rid of its previous tenant, a dirty bum. The film, that's the official synopsis. They call this guy a dirty bum. The film co-stars Michael Ironside and Marshall Bell as the vagrant. Marshall Bell was the general in Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
So it's two Starship Troopers guys in this movie. And it was written by Richard Jeffries, who probably hasn't written anything else you've ever heard of. But Richard Jeffries was attached briefly to an alternate sequel to The Fly in the 90s. So this was like way before we were doing stuff like Halloween 2018 that ignores all the previous sequels. They were trying to do that in the 90s with The Fly. Richard Jeffries was writing it. It was going to be called Flies, 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 and it was set to be directed by Rennie Harlan, who was Gina Davis's husband at the time.
Yeah.
Davis was going to reprise her role as Veronica, and in the story, she gives birth to twin boys, hence Flies, plural. But she survives the ordeal in this one. So that I don't know what ever happened to that or why it fell apart. I couldn't find any more information on the development of it. It was just one of those probably development hell things, movies that will never be. But I thought that was very interesting that was a thing at all. And then in 2015, IDW Publishing released a 5-issue miniseries called The Fly Outbreak that essentially functions as The Fly Part 3. It features Martin Brundle, the Eric Stoltz character, who, at the end of The Fly 2, spoiler, but he infects I won't get specific, but he passes the fly thing, the genetic thing, onto another character. Okay. So in the comic, he's trying to fix that and inadvertently causes a transgenic outbreak. So he causes like a pandemic, essentially, of people's genes changing. Sounds pretty cool. I haven't read it, but
Wow.
I want to look it up now. I want to try to hunt it down. There have also been talks of remakes and reboots over the years, like there always are when a movie is as popular as The Fly is. A director named Todd Lincoln was attached to a possible remake in the early 2000s that never happened. In 2009 or so, David Cronenberg himself was attached to what he called the initial rumor said it was a remake, but he clarified that, saying it was a sort of sequel to The Fly. He called it, quote, more of a strange lateral, let's say oblique sequel than it is a true sequel. He called it a meditation on flyness, which is not about looking fly, I don't think, but I'm not really sure what it does mean. But Gary mentioned this before. He did eventually return to The Fly. He and Howard Shore collaborated on an opera based on the film. It premiered in Paris in July of 2008. The libretto for the opera was written by a guy named David Henry Hwang, who also wrote the play M. Butterfly, which Cronenberg adapted into a film in 1993. So he's working with this guy again on a remake of The Fly, or an opera version of The Fly, I guess I should say, which I'm going to have to go watch that YouTube video, Gary, because I'm very curious as to how they pulled that off. It premiered in Paris, but then I think it ran in Los Angeles for a little while after that, like a few months later.
Ashton Kutcher was in The Butterfly Effect.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah. If you've never seen
What about
that.
The Mothman Prophecies? Richard Gere.
Also a sequel to The Fly.
It's part of the Fly cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Also, A Bug's Life. Weird. It's a weird.
Yeah.
So The Fly, as we said, was a big success financially, critically. It was good. So after The Fly, Cronenberg was he was at this position where he could pretty much get whatever he wanted made, because he had that power at this point. And what he did was he used that power to get a film made that he'd been trying to get off the ground for like 2 decades at this point, almost 2 decades, well over a decade and a half. That movie was Dead Ringers, starring Jeremy Irons. But that's a story for another day. For now, we're done with David Cronenberg. We're leaving the world of David Cronenberg. Don't worry, we do plan to revisit his filmography in the future.
It makes you sad when you get this far into somebody's life and then you just leave them.
Just leave them. It's awful. It's tragic. But we are going to pick up where we left off. But for now, we're going to move on to something else. For our next series, we're not moving that far geographically because we're following up one Canadian director for another. Our next series is going to be on James Cameron, and we're covering everything. We're not, because he doesn't have nearly as many movies as David Cronenberg. So like we did on the Wachowskis, we're going from the beginning. Well, I say that we're not doing Piranha 2. We're starting with the Terminator. We're not, we'll talk about Piranha 2, but we're not going to do a whole episode on Piranha 2. And we're going all the way up to Avatar. But before we get to James Cameron, we're going to play a little game of Cinema Shock Roulette. If you guys remember, before we did our Cronenberg series, we did our first episode of Cinema Shock Roulette. This is something we're going to do in between long form series where we pick a movie totally at random. And what I've done is if you follow me on Letterboxd, I've got a list called Cinema Shock Roulette. It's got a list of films. I think I'm at like 104, 105 movies on that list right now. So we'll never get to all of them unless we're doing this show for 50 years. We'll never get all of them. So it is going to be, it is incredibly random. And we're just going to spin the wheel, pick one at random, and whatever that is what our next episode is going to be on. And then we're going to jump into James Cameron for the remainder of the summer of 2022. Basically, that'll take us all the way into late August, I think, if I remember correctly. So
let me tell you something that's making me uncomfortable about the James Cameron series. I'll just put it out there right now. I've never seen Titanic.
I know, and one thing I am most excited about for this series is Gary finally watching Titanic.
I know, I'm like forced into it.
Actively avoiding it for 25 years at this point.
It's rare that I've seen the movie.
Listen, everybody's seen Titanic except for Gary.
Right.
And Gary has specifically avoided it for 2.5 decades of his life. And now he's going to finally watch it. Honestly, that was one of my main reasons for wanting to do James Cameron.
Forcing me into watching Titanic. Oh, God.
Listen,
helping you fill
internet,
in the gaps of
please
your
don't
film
spoil Titanic for
Please
Gary.
don't spoil the ending of Titanic for Gary.
Don't tell him
The
how it
ship,
ends.
as long as the ship's okay, it doesn't matter.
As long as everyone's fine. All right, so we're gonna spin the wheel. All right, so here we go. Todd, you did the spin the wheel last time, I think, right?
Yeah.
Let's let Gary do it this time.
Yeah.
Gary, spin the wheel.
All right, here I go.
Big money, no whammy. Oh, that's a good one.
Oh,
Nice.
nice.
Okay.
We are watching next week, or next episode rather, on the show from 1986, directed by Frank Oz. We're going to be watching literally one of my favorite movies of all time.
It's great.
The Little Shop of Horrors.
Yes.
Our first musical, I think, right?
Might be since
I
we
knew
started
we'd get to a
Cinema Shock
musical one day. Oh,
What's
man,
even weirder is I just watched. I think it might have been because of the last drive-in with Joe Bob or something. But I just watched the original.
Yeah,
Little
he
Shop
did
of
that one not
Horrors.
too long ago on the last season. It was the last episode of the last season.
Yeah,
with Roger
Two
Corman,
remakes,
right?
Two remakes back to back.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Good point, Todd. Yeah, that'll be fun, man. I love this movie, so I'm very excited for this. I love the soundtrack. In fact, a friend of mine who's a teacher at a local school here just told me the other day that they're putting on a production of Little Shop of Horrors next week.
Nice.
Oh.
So I might have to go see it.
I was going to say.
It'd be fun. That'd be a good little tie-in.
It'd be fun if all three of us went.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So it's Little Shop of Horrors is pretty easy to find. I think it's on HBO at the moment, but it's available to rent and stuff anywhere. It's a very easy to find movie. So we're going to try to make these ones that we do as Roulette ones that you can find on all the major streamings, or at least one of the major streaming services. So we'll be starting with Little Shop of Horrors, and I will go ahead and tell our listeners that we've got some scheduling conflicts coming up between now and our Little Shop of Horrors episode. There might be an extra week or so like gap in between. I'm going on vacation. Todd's going on vacation. Gary's doing a thing with the National Wrestling Alliance. It's just our schedule's all wacky for the next few weeks. So there might be some longer gaps here and there between a couple of these episodes. We'll do our best to get them out as quickly as possible, maybe even throw some bonus content in there. We'll see. But if Thursday morning comes along and you don't see the next episode, I promise it's coming. we just have to work with our ever-changing
we still
schedule.
love you. We still love you. We just can't be in the same Zoom room together anymore.
Yeah. No, I'll be at Disney World. Todd will be camping.
Camping for the wife's birthday. Yeah.
Todd's going to be much more uncomfortable than I am. I'm staying in a very expensive hotel room at Disney World, and Gary will be hanging out with Billy Corgan and a bunch of wrestlers. So he might be uncomfortable as well. I'm not sure.
usually.
Anyway, I guess that's it for this episode, guys. This is the end of our David Cronenberg series. This was a lot of fun. I can't wait to get back into the world of David Cronenberg. We will probably do that in a few months, like early next year or something like that. We'll give us some time, get through some other filmmakers, do some cool stuff, and then we'll revisit David Cronenberg down the line, pick up where we left off with Dead Ringers. But go ahead. I'm going to continue watching these myself. I'm going to watch Dead Ringers this week because I'm just in the world of David Cronenberg, and I want to just continue on this ride for a while. I want to try to finish them all before Crimes of the Future comes out.
He wants to ride David Cronenberg for as long as he'll let him.
Oh, I will ride DC just for as long as I can.
Yeah.
All right, before we go, guys, where can you be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horne on all the social medias.
I am at Justin_Bishop, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd.
And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and DMD Beyond.
Yeah, go listen to Computer Resume. Go watch the NWA for Gary, and go to cinemashock.net for all of our episode archives, our merch, our Discord, everything you need. Or follow us at cinema_shock on Twitter, Instagram. We're on Facebook and all that stuff as well. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
You're afraid to dive into the plasma pool, aren't you, Johnny? You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated, aren't you? I'll bet you think you woke me up about the keys, don't you? But you only know society's straight line about the keys. You can't penetrate beyond society's sick, gray fear of the keys. Drink deep or taste not the plasma spring. You see what I'm saying? And I'm not just talking about sex and penetration. I'm talking about penetration beyond the veil of the keys. A deep, penetrating dive into the plasma pool.
And Todd walks off set.
I know,
There he goes.
He left. Todd left.
Well done, Todd.